Sound. Committee Room 21. Sound. Committee Room 21. Sound. Command. Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound.
Okay, so apologies. Not aware of any apologies. Peter, is he coming late? Is it?
And he's here.
Yeah.
He's in the building.
No bother. Okay. Declarations of interest. I remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any members have any interest that they wish to declare? No? Okay, so Chairperson's business. At page 6, a note the informal meeting of the National Association of Funeral Directors, which was held on the 9th of October 2024. So I'm seeking members' views or agreement in relation to asking the department for the number of Class C licences held for funeral limousines if available. Its view on whether funeral limousines should be exempt from the hire and reward regulatory requirements of the 2008 Act, which the NAFD contains. Is not the case in other jurisdictions, and its view on the National Association of Funeral Directors' concerns regarding the future availability of drivers for funeral limousines should the position not change, and clarification of whether any changes to the treatment of funeral limousines could be made by regulations or if primary legislation is required. Any views or thoughts? Are you content with those as set out? Content? Yeah, thank you. Okay, item 4 is the draft minutes. At page 10, the draft minutes of proceedings for the meeting on the 16th of October 2024, and I'm seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 16th of October 2024, and if so, I'll sign the minutes now. Content? Thank you. Okay, matters arising. I remind members that the committee did agree its response on the draft programme for government 2024, which has been provided to the committee for the Executive Office. So I'm just seeking agreement that we do forward the response to DFI for information. Are you content with that? Yeah. Okay, correspondence. At page 20, you'll see the correspondence memo. We do have quite a bit of correspondence there to get through, but I just want to draw attention specifically to page 127, item 6.18, which is correspondence from the Minister for Infrastructure providing an update on progress to increase the uptake of electric vehicles by executive departments, arm's length bodies and local councils. So I'm suggesting that the committee ask councils for details and an update of their electric vehicles across their fleets, and write to the Statutory Committees to suggest that they ask for an update on progress to increase the uptake of electric vehicles in respect of their departments. Obviously this is in light of the legislation that the EV mandate that has went through the Assembly as well, so it might be interesting just to get some details on that if you're content with that. Pages 138 to 151, items 6.22 to 6.26, responses regarding assistance available for passengers living with disability and occasions when requested or confirmed assistance was not provided, resulting in disruption to travel for passengers. So I'm seeking agreement just to request a written briefing from the Consumer Council, including information on its work as designated complaints handler for the regulation, providing rights for passengers with disabilities and reduced mobility when travelling by air, including the number and type of complaints received, the work of accessibility forums, and details of any issues or concerns arising from the annual accessibility audits for the 3 Northern Ireland airports. Are you content with that approach, or was there anything anybody wanted to add? Content with that? Yep. Okay, and then I'm also just seeking agreement to forward the correspondence from the airports to IMTAC. Thought it might be useful that they would see what some of those airports have come back to say to us. Okay, is there any other comments that members want to raise or any issues in the items of correspondence that were there? Keith, yeah?
Just as
was about to turn on the mic. That's a different meeting. Chair, just on, you see in correspondence, whenever we communicate with any water or anybody, we reach out to someone. How do we record that or monitor that? I remember in the past we used to, I think on the infrastructure committee, you had like a sort of an action point. How do you do that we can see what's outstanding? Or can we?
Yeah, Chair, we actually stopped that practice because it was getting quite lengthy. It was 20 or 30, because it was the whole content of the letter that was really included in it. We can put a list in every week if you want.
It's just good to know that what we're waiting on. You know, sometimes you see waiting, and that's fine because it doesn't follow the page, but it's good for us to see that if the committee's agreeable. Yeah. It's just to get a wee snapshot to say, you know, who we're waiting on correspondence from. Yeah,
we can do that, but I think it would change it from what went before, because it was, I think, 20 or 30 pages in the end.
No, it's only a wee summary line.
Basically, in a line. Okay.
If
members, are you content with that? Yeah. Just, take your point. It might help just to have a wee list there that we can see. That's fair enough. I did have an item that I've seen. It was just, I do know that we'll have the interim regional planning coming in for an oral evidence session, but I did note in their work programme we had asked up to 2025, I think March 2025, but I see there's dates till November 2024, so and they will be coming into the committee, so I think it's just useful to bear in mind, because obviously planning comes up quite a bit, so it'll be interesting when that oral session comes up. I know they have the other sessions planned, but it's just the dates attached to that as well. Okay, any other items that members have? Okay, item 7 then is the impact of Northern Ireland Water's capacity constraints on the construction sector, Construction Employers Federation and the Royal Society of Ulster Architects oral evidence. So at page 173 you'll see the Clerk's memo, CEF and RSUA oral evidence. At page 178 you'll see the impact of Northern Ireland Water's capacity constraints on the construction sector, Construction's Employers Federation written evidence. At page 186 you'll see the impact of Northern Ireland Water's capacity constraints on the construction sector. That's from the Royal Society of Ulster Architects written evidence. And we welcome to the committee today Mr. Mark Spence, Chief Executive of Construction Employers Federation, Mr. Martin Mallon, Chair of CEF's Housing Committee, Construction Employers Federation, Mr. Kieran Fox, Director of the Royal Society of Ulster Architecture. We've Mrs. Joan McCoy, White Ink, Architects, and RSUA Past President and Honorary Secretary, and Mr. Mark Todd, Architect and owner of Mark Todd Architects. So I'm seeking agreement just that the evidence is recorded by Hansard members, if you're content.
Great.
And we do obviously have your written evidence that we have had a look at ourselves before the committee meeting today. So I'm just maybe asking for a brief opening statement of 10 minutes, and then we're going to come to members' questions, if that's okay. So whoever wants to take it off first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I will make some opening remarks, and then Kieran will supplement those, and we'll get that done within your time. Thank you very much. So thank you, Chair, and members, for the opportunity to brief you today on the issues facing the construction sector in Northern Ireland as a result of the underfunding of NI Water. I'm Mark Spence, Chief Executive of the CEF, and joined today by Martin Mallon, who is Managing Director of South Bank Square, and also the Chair of our Housing Committee. For some 15 years, NI has, on an annual basis, built only around 50% of its new build housing need. That has resulted in a dearth of new supply of housing of all tenure types, exacerbating our social housing waiting lists and the difficulties that many have in being able to move from home rental to home ownership. Earlier this year, the CEF conducted a survey of our home builders, which made it clear that the current wastewater capacity constraints are holding back some 8,500 homes, which equates to about £1 billion of investment. When coupled with the proposals of housing associations and other developers, that figure goes up to around 19,000 homes, which are unable today to proceed That figure again doubles to 37,000 if you factor in the number of housing inquiries that NI Water have received. This gives us a 60-year low in housing completions in 2023. The figure in 2024 is likely to be even lower, so we are therefore undoubtedly in the middle of a housing crisis in Northern Ireland. The commitment in the draft programme for government to provide more social, affordable and sustainable housing is very much welcomed, but it falls drastically short of what is needed to deal with our housing crisis. Although the forthcoming DFC-led housing supply strategy will, quite rightly, deal with the detail of how we deliver our home building targets, it's clear to us that we need the Executive to set a much stronger statement of intent and intervention. That is why in our response to the draft programme for government, we will argue that how we sustainably fund our water and wastewater system is itself more than worthy of being a standalone 10th priority, underpinning and enabling the entire strategy. It's very clear to us at this stage as well that the Executive's investment strategy will similarly fail to outline a sustainable, realistic path towards delivering the huge uplift in investment in the Northern Ireland economy that we need without NI Water. As we understand it, the new investment strategy will detail a proposal to spend some £26 billion of capital funding on our infrastructure over the next 10 years. However, when that figure is considered in real terms, that is simply this year's capital budget at around £2 billion, which is the same in cash terms as 17 years ago in 2007-8. Adding on RRI borrowing and a modest inflationary uplift each year multiplied by 10. In our view, that does not represent a strategic investment plan. That is a spending plan which lacks ambition or strategy, whilst perhaps being realistic. While much of the focus on the underfunding of NI Water has been on the impact on house building, it's vital we don't overlook the immediate impact this has had on the civil engineering industry locally. As PC21 was being developed, NI Water worked very closely with the industry to put in place a series of frameworks to deliver the significant uplift in work that was going to be required. With much of that now being halted, many of these firms are having to go into sharp reverse. This has resulted in a significant number of job losses and a race for new work, once again, outside Northern Ireland. When processes like these are set in train, it can be incredibly hard to reverse, and it is likely that this single year of the PC21 underfunding may result in 2 to 3 years delay, should funding even become available at a later stage. As we turn to potential solutions, of the 19,000 homes currently being held back, home builder funded solutions such as stormwater offsetting may be advanced, but only where NI Water and the NIEA are satisfied with the proposal. This approach, already at significant cost to home builders, must be expedited to ensure that the much needed investment in development continues. Wastewater impact assessments regularly take unnecessary months or even years where solutions to enable home building have been readily identified. There is an ongoing need for NI Water to be wholly transparent with home builders when it comes to the condition of the network, when reasonable requests for information and modelling data are being made. This is not currently common practice. Linked to this, we must also make sure that in common with Northern Ireland Water and the NIEA, all assets are being fully utilised and that permits for discharge consents are granted where they are reasonable and cause no detriment. Looking to the other 18,000 homes which are currently proposed for upwards of 25 cities and towns where no existing connection or solution is feasible due to the budgetary constraints, it's important that the Department takes forward a legislative change that would enable home builders to fund wastewater upgrades. However, we must be very clear about what this change would mean and what it would not mean. Considered on a site-by-site basis, it's our view that such a change would lead to a relatively small number of sites being able to proceed. The overwhelming majority of wastewater system upgrades required in the 25 towns and cities run into the costs of millions, if not tens of millions of pounds. When any home builder puts this into the overall costs, the viability of any specific site is therefore extremely unlikely. We must therefore continue to fund NI Water's PC21 and 27 business plan, but we must find a way of doing that sustainably to meet their £600 million plus annual requirement. In the context of NI Executive's constrained capital budget, our view is that this can be achieved by moving to a mutual or cooperative or public corporation model, which along with other reforms to the existing suboptimal governance model would enable NI Water to borrow to their full potential, effectively funding their capital plans in the same way that the Executive currently does with the Social Housing Development Plan. And we do support the Executive's recent decisions made with regards to Northern Ireland Executive funding for Housing Executive. Crucial to this will be giving NI Water a defined income stream, as this was identified in the Northern Ireland Audit Office's report funding water infrastructure in Northern Ireland in March this year. A defined income stream is the fundamental missing element of the overall price control process. Without a guaranteed long-term defined income stream from the executive, the ability to fund against its assets, we are drastically curtailing the ability of NI Water to fund the infrastructure and therefore the economy. We do not believe that this change requires the introduction of individual household billed water charging, or indeed any uplift in the existing rates bills paid by domestic consumers. Rather, from the existing rates bills, a direct hypothecated income stream to NI Water could be created, along with additional legislation in respect of their governance model. This would enable them to fully borrow against their assets. Short of a fundamental reform of this nature, we fail to see how the Northern Ireland Executive can sustainably fund NI Water's needs, given how crucial that investment is to the wider economic activity. We therefore support the call in the Audit Office report in March 24 for the Department to establish a comprehensive review of alternative arrangements led by suitably qualified experts. Whether in addition to this, or in the event that the Department decides not to commission such a report, we believe it is vital that the work of this committee and of the Public Accounts Committee looks at an analysis of the Audit Office's report, undertakes an inquiry into the options for fundamental governance and funding review of NI Water. As we've sought to highlight in this briefing note, the economic consequences of doing this and not doing this could be catastrophic to the economy of Northern Ireland. We're very happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. And I now invite Kieran to supplement with his comments.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to present today. The RSUA is the professional body for architects in Northern Ireland, and we certainly want to see a built environment which works in harmony with our natural environment. I'm joined by Joan, who represents a medium-sized practice based in Belfast, and Mark representing a smaller practice, just to give the members of the committee an opportunity to hear from what life is like at the cold face for architects working in this very difficult circumstance. The NI Water wastewater infrastructure situation is a fiasco. It really is a case of the good, the bad and the ugly for architects who are working with developers at the moment. The good being you could be extremely fortunate in this postcode lottery where you happen to be developing in an area where there is the ability to connect and therefore there's no cost particularly for you. Obviously the normal development cost, but in terms of wastewater connection, there's the bad, which is where you're told yes you can develop, but there's going to be considerable cost to you for that, and that's about the offsetting costs, and that can run into many, many thousands. And then there's the ugly, where you're told it's a black and white no, there will be no development here for X number of years. We certainly feel that the current model with this postcode lottery needs to be addressed. Why should somebody get it for free and somebody else have to pay? And who's making the decisions about where future investment goes? This becomes critically important. Wastewater investment results in development being able to proceed. Where is the transparency around who gets the upgrade next? Because that means who gets housing next, what school is able to proceed, what business investment is able to proceed. There needs to be much greater transparency around that decision-making process because of its public impact. The second thing to mention is about bureaucracy. Bureaucracy within the system currently is, in our view, preventing some reasonable solutions. We have cases in small-scale development where solutions are being brought forward which would result in water being discharged into rivers and streams, which is meeting the EU standards, which is what we want to see, and those solutions are being turned down by NI Water. We have young architects in Northern Ireland who have come back to work here after maybe studying abroad, cannot work in Northern Ireland any longer because every project they bring forward is hitting the buffers, and we know that people are being forced to work in England, the Republic of Ireland. I think it's a real shame that we are not able to support our young emerging talent. The danger, of course, long term is that we lose that talent. Every town and city in Northern Ireland is faced with problems around dereliction. We have all these initiatives trying to encourage living above the shop, bringing things back into use. But time and time again, we're seeing that proposals are coming forward to convert use, maybe from an old office into a set of apartments. It's what we all want to see. Where are they hitting the buffer? Primarily through NI Water connections. We even have examples where the number of WCs in a building isn't changing, but yet NI Water are giving a refusal. It just seems hard to understand. And then we get on to the cost and delay. So even the processing in behind this, everybody's been asked to do these pre-development inquiries and wastewater impact assessments. That is a direct cost where you pay a fee to NI Water, but you also have to pay a fee to an engineer to prepare a report. So for small-scale development, that fee can be substantial, certainly thousands of pounds. And we had a case recently where a member reported sending their fee in of £2,500 and getting a response almost immediately, which clearly demonstrated that that nothing had even been considered, but yet the fee was still taken. So there's issues there in terms of just the current system that we feel can be sorted out. We very much advocate nature-based solutions. We think that NI Water should be doing the same, that where there's the possibility of that should be the number one priority. Instead, we're seeing hard engineering solutions being the preference. And then finally, just to, I suppose, reinforce the point that Mark makes around funding, we do believe that a cooperative model has many benefits. The executive has agreed to the move towards a cooperative model for funding the housing executive. So as a principle, there seems to be an acknowledgement that that's an acceptable model. Why not for NI Water too, if it would enable some of these issues to be addressed more quickly. We did a call out to members in advance of this, asking for examples of the day-to-day experience of this and the number of projects impacted. I won't run through them now, but I mean, and it certainly can provide an update to the committee afterwards. All across Northern Ireland, housing, community buildings. We had one practice alone where the number of projects valued 400 million that are being held up in the system. So it really is, there are real concerns across the sector that this has hit this absolutely critical moment, and we need to see both short-term action and long-term action to address it.
Thank you. I suppose that's why we have you both here today, because we're aware that NI Water did do some engagement work over the summer with a vast number of stakeholders. Obviously, as part of the committee, we can't have every stakeholder from Northern Ireland in here, unfortunately, but that's why we felt it would be important to have some representative bodies from the industry come and brief us on what the situation is across Northern Ireland. So, Kieran, if you wouldn't mind, it'd been useful for the committee to see that, some of that written evidence that you have correlated together from some of your members that we can take a look through as well ourselves. But you'd referenced there, Mark, in terms of the investment strategy, and you'd said that the investment strategy will fail. Have you had input into it?
No, we've had early briefings with SIB previously, but we haven't seen the detail of it. But we have obviously been made aware of the sum involved, so the 10-year spend of 26 billion, which, as I say, does not represent an increase from where we are today. That's 10 years of doing what we're currently doing now, and what we're currently doing now is underfunding NI Water, particularly because that's the topic of the day, in year by around 300 million this year. If we're going to continue to underfund NI Water for the span of the investment strategy by the same amount, then we are heading into an economic wasteland, because we require that water infrastructure to support the economy. So that's our concern with the investment strategy. We understand there's been a lot of good work done, and we've been briefed by CPD on that, and the diligence and the good work that's gone into it will present what I would regard as a robust spending plan. It doesn't represent a strategic plan. Strategy, it should involve looking at all options. This doesn't look at any options. This assumes we get the same pocket money every week for the next 10 years. It's insufficient now. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. So we think the investment strategy fails simply because it is not strategic.
So apart from, it's really down to strategy then that you believe. Do you believe that the funding is sufficient?
No.
So
that is the point,
what?
Yes.
So then you have said that it needs to. You believe that it should be, Northern Ireland Water should be mutualised. What other aspects should be? No, we haven't said that.
I think what we're saying is we support the Audit Office's recommendation that all options should be on the table. Mutualisation, maybe one of those, cooperative model, maybe one, public corporation, maybe another. What we are saying is that the status quo is unsustainable. The status quo is huge underfunding of NI Water, which undermines the full investment strategy. We hear not just about housing, which is, yes, very important to all of us on this table today, but we're very aware as well. Schools projects in the pipeline will cease if they have extra requirements, and we have specific information on SEN school enhancements. We're aware of some health projects which are at risk. We very much know there are commercial projects. We know there are factories which have failed in their attempts to set up in Northern Ireland and have relocated to other countries, taking jobs with them. So our concern around this is the wider economic piece. The investment strategy assumes we continue to do 10 more years of what we're exactly doing today, which is hugely underfunding NI Water. That's our concern. The strategy should have been broader. The word strategy would suggest you should be looking at all options. Nothing should be off the table. Nothing's decided, but it would seem to me negligent not to consider all options. We can look at the options, come to a shortlist, come to a preference, and then it would be up to the powers that be whether that's something to pursue or not. But to not consider all options in the current circumstances we're in seems reprehensible to us.
Okay. In the written evidence, it talks about bureaucracy, and you talked to that today in relation to between NI Water and DAERA as well. So, and that's resulted in reasonable solutions being declined. So you touched very briefly on what some of those reasonable solutions may be in terms of dereliction and things like that. Who would be responsible for installing on-site treatment facilities in small developments? Because I know that was referenced in your written.
Yeah, well, Mark actually has a good example. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's I've various projects. One of which is a small rural development, and for anything, NI Water's policy for anything more than 2 houses in a rural environment require a fully adoptable NI Water treatment facility. That can cost anywhere in the region between 180 and £200,000. It takes up a substantial amount of space. It's essentially a hammer to kill a fly. It's no engineer worth their salt would seriously consider something infrastructure of that scale for such a small development. Yet that's presented by NI Water as a viable solution for that site, and then that site gets presented, and I suppose as in NI Water's results as this site has a viable solution, where it clearly isn't a solution. It's a complete non-starter. So that's one example. Well, on that particular point, at the coalface, what I find so frustrating is NI Water's policy changes. They change all the time. It's hard to keep track. And I appreciate there's been public consultation and stakeholder engagement in recent years, but the policy changes sort of predate that. So it appears from sole practitioners like myself that policies have been implemented with no stakeholder engagement, no political approval, no transparency, and we're trying to second guess what the next policy change is, and it's impossible to keep track, advise clients on how sites should be developed, if they can be developed when things evolve on a monthly basis. Two examples of those would be the 2 houses or more in a rural environment require a wastewater treatment facility like I just described. When and how did that come into place? Who approved that? What was the process? And there's another one is the 5-year occupancy. If any derelict building or unoccupied building rather, not derelict, is unoccupied for 5 years or more, it loses its rights to connect. So even if you want to change of use in that building, if there's a shop on a main street that wants to be converted into a restaurant or a coffee shop, if it's been empty for 5 years, it loses its rights to connection. And where did that come from? Who approved it? Why 5 years? There's no trail of evidence or correspondence with the industry as to how those things became decided.
And you were saying there that policy changes can happen monthly?
Well, it evolves constantly. So 1 minute you're advised one thing by NI Water, then a couple of months down the line the circumstances can change and it's a different approach. So it's inconsistent. It's consistently inconsistent is my experience.
So how So obviously we have introduced checklists then, and obviously NI Water is a statutory consultee. So how difficult does that make it when you're going through the planning process and you have to meet the checklist and yet there's policy changes?
It's hard to understand what the policy changes are, because when you actually ask for a policy, by definition, you know, for example, if I go to if I'm doing a planning application and there's a very clear planning policy guidance, the preamble talks about stakeholder engagement, changes in legislation, and I can navigate a planning application using policies that are appropriately documented. With NI Water, when you ask for a policy, the policy doesn't exist. It hasn't been through any rigorous process or consultation. So you get long-winded advice and guidelines, and the guidelines on their website have changed across years. But there's no definitive place to go to find a list of policies that has been fed into by stakeholders, and so that we understand the consequences of these changes and what the impact they're having on small housing developments in rural environments. It's pretty much impossible to try and get, particularly in my field, small sites that range in and around 2 and 7 houses to get them going.
Okay.
I think it's more they're Northern Ireland Water internal procedures as opposed to policy that you would be thinking about as policy. Not policy as such, but it's their internal procedures.
Yeah. Okay.
So it is, and the planning checklist, in terms of planning, the first response we always get to planning application is Northern Ireland Water, and it's a refusal.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the checklist done.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to go to other members. So, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, folks, for coming along today. Firstly, want to echo and agree with your notion about restructuring and the funding model. I think every option needs to be on the table, and simply doing nothing is quite simply not an option, given the impacts and how difficult things are, as we know. First thing I want to touch on is developer contributions. There's been suggestions mooted about legislative change, and the information around that is quite scant at this stage. Firstly, I want to get your thoughts on that, and secondly, it's already being done in some respects, as I'm aware. Can you maybe just outline to what extent that's happening, how proportionate that is, and how impactful you think any contribution changes might have?
I might start, and then I'm going to ask Martin as a developer to make it real for you, but you're quite right, developer contributions are current, have been going on for many, many years in different forms. The legislative changes that the Minister is talking about now are at a different level, and those are, as I touched upon, that's at the level of possibly tens of millions of pounds for individual projects for NI Water where developers could contribute, but given the scale of that investment, it's highly unlikely there will be more than a handful of sites in Northern Ireland where that will make a real impact. So we welcome it, but we caution that it is a very small part of the jigsaw. But in terms of the day-to-day developer contributions, your experience with them, Martin?
Yeah, I think it's good to have there as an option, but it already happens, or doesn't happen, as the case primarily is. I can't think of maybe more than a handful of scenarios where developer-funded solution has actually been delivered. So that's the reality of it. In terms of the figures that have been, mentioned, that's only going to work for the prime sites in the prime areas. That's not going to work for your social housing site or your site, in a suburban location, on a provincial location. That ain't going to work. Adding 15,000-20,000 as effectively a roof tax is not, I'm afraid to say, is not going to be a solution. That just, it might be a solution in some limited cases in those prime areas, and maybe outside of those prime areas where you just simply lump it onto the price of the house, and all that's going to do is penalise the people who are buying new houses. So I don't think that's a very fair system either. So you then have a scenario where you have the haves and the have-nots, those who have a house and those who don't have a house.
The RSUA would be very much behind that as an issue, particularly whenever Mark's been talking about the strategic look at how you solve this problem. Any solution that means that the richest sites win is untenable, we think, in Northern Ireland. And I think it's one of the big challenges that the solution is going to have, which is to look at how do you prioritise where the money's spent, but also how do you spread the money, and how do you justify to the developers that if they pay the money that you spend it somewhere else? So there are challenges around these big solutions, but anything that says if you can charge a whole lot of money for a house, you get the solution, is going to create great inequality across Northern Ireland. So it's a very dangerous path.
And we're particularly concerned about what the impact it would have on social housing. So it's great, you have your big 4-bedroom, detached houses getting built, fantastic, but what about all the social housing that needs to get built? Well, sorry, we don't have the extra funds to do that, so that falls down the pecking order. I don't think that's the solution that anybody in the Assembly wants to see, but we have to be careful about just drifting towards something that seems like a quick fix.
Yeah, exactly. And we had a debate last week on the social housing crisis and affordable housing crisis. And the reality is that social housing associations, for example, are on the standstill financially. They don't have the bandwidth within their budget to be able to do that developer-led approach, quite simply, or for the smaller projects. It's not really viable.
That figure that's been mentioned is of the 8% of the typical house price in Northern Ireland. That's, you can't just add 8% on.
Yes.
Or in the social housing sphere, where do you find it amongst the total cost indicator, which is their funding model? That model struggles with small increases. It's struggled with inflation over the last few years. So we have a 20-25% inflation in bill costs and labour costs over the last 3 or 4 years. And then we're talking about another potential 10% in one go, which it isn't going to work.
Housing association grant as well.
50
to 44%.
Yeah, won't.
Okay, sorry.
So just in terms of that then, is there evidence in terms of where developer-led contributions are happening? Are they invariably being passed on to the cost of the house, so ultimately the consumer and the buyer is paying for it indirectly? So it's developer-led and mortgage owner paid?
They're typically absorbed into the bill. It's typically absorbed into the bill costs. I'm not getting into the technical detail, but stormwater offsetting, which we could go down and start trying to explain, what that is and what that solution is. But in terms, if you're thinking about big engineered solutions like a developer paying for a new treatment plant or something like that, even 15,000-20,000 a house wouldn't touch the sides of what those things cost. So that is not the type of solution that's envisaged here. It's softer solutions, as in stormwater offsetting and stuff like that, upsizing pipes. I think the other important thing to say is all new housing sites, and we are talking about housing here, but this affects all sorts of development, not just housing, and it's all types of housing, it's private and social. But all new housing sites have fully separated systems. So they have a stormwater system which tends to cost millions of pounds in bigger sites, because you're holding back all that capacity on site, and you've obviously then got a foul sewage system as well. So those sites have a up-to-date 21st century separated system. The issue is not there. The issue is further down along the networks in an old combined sewer somewhere. And that's why I suppose house builders particularly feel it's a wee bit unfair that where the blockage is, but yet we're spending millions of pounds, hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds on these sites, putting in proper sewage systems on the site itself.
Exactly.
If you follow me.
Yeah.
John, we have an example of 15 houses in Dundonald, project value of about 2.7 million, and that's been delayed for 2 years as they try and work out an offsetting solution. So it's not even that you might get there eventually, but the whole rigmarole of just trying to get 15 houses built.
Yes.
So at the moment they're then stuck in this procedural issue between an Article 161 and a street works licence, and one saying you need the other and the other saying you need to have that one first. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. And now it may get resolved ultimately, and that might be able to proceed. Then there'll be the cost of that offsetting. And what we're seeing at times is there can be an agreement in principle with NI Water what the offsetting will be. Then people go and see what the actual cost is. And suddenly it turns out you can't do it. Yeah. And we're seeing that at every scale, whether it's a larger development or it's a couple of houses. Even Mark and I were talking about, you have to often look to other properties nearby where you take the rainwater off their house. So it's like literally knocking doors saying, can we have some of your rainwater and redirect it away from the sewer? And of course, why would anybody want somebody else coming onto their property to redirect their rainwater away? It seems like a bizarre situation that we're in. And that the amount of rainwater we're talking about at times is like the size of the amount that would fall on the size of one car parking space. So we feel that, at the smaller scale, there needs to be some sort of de minimis approach and a better way of getting all those small developments through. We've got family homes where someone's looking to build on the family land, unable to proceed because of the additional costs. And then at the upper scale, where we're talking about 20, 30 million pound projects, there's just a straight no.
And it's not just houses though. I mean, we're talking about people's jobs and their plans for development. There are hairdressers who can't expand their shops. There are coffee shop owners who can't change from a betting shop into a coffee shop. There are all sorts of people's small economic, and these are people's lives, and they can't move on and they can't make decisions because they can't get a water connection.
I just want to come finally, because I mean, we could talk all day about this, and I'm sure others will tease out, but I want to come back to the point the Chair made, and you made, Kieran, about the bureaucracy limiting progress, and I want to be constituent based in this in terms of Larne, for example. My office is in Larne. There's a complete blanket ban, from what looks to me, from NI Water to just say no to everything. In your experience, is that a standardised objection, or do they actually assess it? And the reason I say that, there's an SEN school in my constituency in Larne that wants to put in 2 new mobiles, and despite the fact that those young people would be at home in Larne if they weren't in the school, NI Water's turned it down. At the end of the day, they can't be in 2 places at once. That hasn't been assessed. They've just said no. Is that an experience, or do they actually assess the applications on their merit and look at the genuine impact on the system it will have?
Certainly from what we've heard from all of our members is that is in certain areas now. In Larne, if only have 20 social houses in Larne. Yeah. They've just been told no, straight blanket no.
No on
2027,
everything.
And it's 2027 would be the earliest, but it will depend on whether they get NI Water get the budget to upgrade the treatment facility works in the 27 to 30 budget period. Yeah. But it's almost like don't talk to us until then. That's the answer that we're hearing back in the Larne area. Yeah,
there's different levels. So those 20, 30 towns are just a blanket no now. But typically you get the refusal at planning stage, and then you enter the wastewater impact assessment process, and that could take, well, that's the first one I've ever heard this morning about one taking 24 hours. Typically that takes a year, 2 years, whatever, and it's within that process that you tease out what the solution might be. Then you have to price the solution and see if it works or doesn't work. And all of that takes an awful lot of time, and that time is obviously costing jobs, it's costing houses, it's costing livelihoods, it's costing everything. Northern Ireland Water need more money, but the bureaucracy behind it and the procedures need to be addressed as well.
Yeah, it's fair to say as well, we do have a sense that Northern Ireland Water are being extremely prudent, which is, in terms of their governance, quite the correct thing to do, but I feel sometimes that generates the no without looking at the tolerance within their models.
Yes.
So what we are continually doing is saying that we fully understand the need for more funding, but at the moment what they're actually going to do with the blanket no response and their modelling is actually bring all construction to a halt where there might be tolerances in the model, and there have been 1 or 2 instances where independent engineering reports have found that actually it could proceed and then they have allowed it to proceed. We don't want to be in that space of contesting every decision, but it is important for us at NI Water work with home builders, work with commercial premises, work with all types of economic development on the very micro scale. Some of these decisions will not make one bit of difference to the overall model, but it can make a huge difference to an SME or a family business.
Absolutely.
So we do ask for tolerance from NI Water in that regard.
So just on Upper Cross Street, Larne, just to give you an example of how things really aren't working, Upper Cross Street in Larne, the architect submitted the fee of £2,800 to NI Water and got a return pretty much immediately saying no. And they took the fee anyway, which was to assess the wastewater impact assessment. You haven't even looked at this assessment and you're telling us no. There's something wrong in that system.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you. I have quite a list of people that we need to get through, and I'm very conscious that it's just been myself and the Deputy Chair so far. So if you don't mind, if the panel would try and keep their as quick as possible, just so that we can try and get through the amount of questions that we do have. This is a very important issue. I don't want to curtail the conversation, but we do need to get some questions answered. So Stephen.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks folks for your presentation. I appreciate the far-reaching impacts, far beyond just homes, as you've very eloquently stated. What engagement has your sector had, do you feel, with the Department and the Minister? And with that in mind, do you feel the Minister, fully recognises the scale and the challenge of, how significant this is for both now and the future in Northern Ireland?
Speaking for CEF, and Kieran will speak in a moment, no doubt, we've had a number of meetings with the Minister. The Minister is very well briefed. fully understands the constraints that this imposes. I suppose what we are seeking from the Minister is some movement in the regards to looking at all options. Earlier in the year, it appeared that other options were not under consideration. I think that view is slightly changed now. We hope it is. The Minister attended our awards night recently and spoke to the assembled audience of contractors, and I think there is some movement there. I think we do have to get to a situation where the Assembly can at least consider options before ruling them out. We would be very concerned if options were ruled out without due process. We fully support the Audit Office's recommendation that this should be done by independent, expert-led inquiry. We don't believe this is something that can be done in-house. And there are good examples and bad examples to be learnt from in other jurisdictions, and we think all of that should be done in real time. We know there are a number of historical reports, but this is of such a magnitude of an issue for the economy here. We think it is deserving of an up-to-date review by those independent experts. So the Minister has been very candid with us, as is his style, and very frank with us, and has obviously done what he can this year within the funding envelope. The funding envelope is not his sole responsibility. That is an executive-wide responsibility. It is impacting, as we've said, the programme for government, which will be each of those ministers trying to deliver on their agenda. And Conor Murphy has spoken to the topic as well in regards to how water infrastructure is holding back his plans for the economy in terms of factories and infrastructure. So I think it's understood. I hope all of the ministers understand it to the same level, and I hope they all lend their support to the Infrastructure Minister to take forward a review of all options.
We spoke to the Infrastructure Minister informally in May on this and other issues, and had a formal meeting scheduled for July, but it's been put back 3 times now, and we're waiting for a new date. So we are struggling a little to get the engagement we would like. Mark and myself and others met with the Finance Minister, and it was very useful actually to be able to raise with the Finance Minister the importance. Ultimately, these things, you know, if NI Water has an allocated price control budget and they're not even getting that sort of base level of funding, it's no surprise that these issues are not it's not a matter of them, they were bad, but they're just getting worse. But we do certainly hopefully we will get that engagement with the Infrastructure Minister within the next couple of weeks or months.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully that can be accommodated, certainly. Just the final question then, I'm keen to hear a wee bit more about the mutualisation cooperative type model. You know, how do you feel that could work, and how do you see that working in terms of best practice, maybe in other parts of the UK or beyond?
So say there are those different options. Mutualisation is an option. The cooperative model may be more palatable to some, and then there's public corporation models. There's subtle differences between all of them, but I think the important thing to say is that I think there is a fear of privatisation, and the Minister's been very clear that's not a road to go down, and we would fully support that. We don't see any good models of privatisation out there. We're not calling for that. What we are calling for is a model which looks quite similar in nature and scope to what's been already achieved with the Housing Executive. And if we think of our social housing development programme, that is 50% funded by private funders. That doesn't make them any less a public asset or any less for the public good. So we think the Assembly is on board with how we fund that. The Housing Executive's proposals, we understand, are with the Treasury at the moment to allow them to increase their borrowing, which is hugely needed for their retrofit programme to reduce carbon emissions and energy. So we think there is already within this building an understanding of a model that works for the housing sector. Why not therefore look at that for the water sector? There are other models, as you say, in other legislations and jurisdictions. I think that it needs to be independently expert-led. We all have some knowledge to it. I wouldn't pretend to be an expert in it. There's a lot required in there, but I think the important thing to give comfort to the general public, but also to the elected members, is that this can only ever become what this House and the Assembly decides it is, and there would be concerns that this is a first step on a road to somewhere else. No, you all know the huge effort and diligence that goes into legislation. Nothing can happen by accident. It'll be whatever the elected members decide it shall be, so it can be very tightly defined. But it seems to us, as interested parties, if there's an availability of funding that doesn't necessarily lose control at all of the public asset and still delivers the public good, we should at least look at that. We wouldn't understand why we can't at least look at those options.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Keith.
Okay, thanks for coming along. I have a few questions here. I'll bang through them fairly quick. You referred to good, bad, and ugly. If you were to give me a synopsis across NI with responses from NI Water, what percentage would you put in each of those three categories?
I think NI Water actually have published their own figures in that in terms of for housing units. I think they said 37,000 units were under consideration or facing problems, and I think it was 18,000 or 19,000 were there were potential solutions, and the rest they were given a blanket ban.
But from your workload, let's say the architecture world, what workload is is falling into that if you were guesstimating the three brackets?
I mean, it's pretty similar if you look at those,
okay.
It's very geographically based now in terms of the towns that have been identified as being the blanket no towns, and then there's the areas where there is still the potential for solutions. Or if you started the process as some did like 2 years ago, you could be in the ongoing process of trying to agree a solution. So
but it's a wee bit more than that though, because you can't actually say what the ugly are, because we do a lot of our work outside Northern Ireland, and we have Northern Ireland people who are developers who want to come home and do development in Northern Ireland, and every single site they've looked at, they've gone, I'm not even going to consider it, because their first thing is you won't get a sewage connection. So they're all in the ugly, but they don't exist, and there are thousands of those.
Yeah, we do hear that all the time, and it's actually one of the most frustrating things, that idea of people wanting to come to Northern Ireland to invest funding, and then they're told what the obstacles are going to be, and then they say, well, there's no point.
Another question then, on all the documentation we hear about capacity restraints. From you as an industry, would you call it capacity restraints, treatment restraints? Yes, with pipe size, but with wastewater treatment capacity. Who's looking at those solutions in there? Is that purely NI Water internal, or do they harvest that out to anybody to say, come and try and solve my problem for me, to give me 5 years on this plant? Because it seems to be tens of millions. Is there any other solutions there that other people are looking at? You look at Denmark, Finland, those countries seem to be the experts in this broadly. So broadly, as my question is NI Water asking for help outside of themselves?
Mark? The farm out the modelling, they have their own in-house modelling team, and then there's external consultants also help with the modelling as well. We do have some concerns around the modelling and the inputs into that model, because it is predictive, and like any model, it's really only as good as the information that goes into it, but we don't have a full picture, so we don't know. In terms of looking at other solutions, not as far as I don't think they are looking at other types of solutions, but I know they have talked about SUDs and different other sort of softer engineered solutions for stormwater, but I'm not sure on the sewage side. Just
it's who they ask for that help. Is it purely in-house, or is it?
I don't know. I think the first step of the first part of the issue that needs to be resolved is the modelling and how that's all arrived at, because it's really that's giving you the red flag on each of the areas. And back to the earlier point in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly, I would say the direction of travel looks to be like everywhere's going to be closed, and that's our fear. Is that it's at the minute it's half of Northern Ireland or whatever, but like our fear is that it's just going to be a complete shutdown.
Okay, and one final question. Probably use Dungannon as a good example from a treatment point of view. You've a lot of not so much industry, but food processing, etc., feeding into those treatment plants, which is putting a serious loading on those plants, right? And previous work life, we had to put our own treatment plants to reduce loading on the thing. Do you think is there enough of that happening that, and I'm not blaming food processing, but use that as the example, that those are putting a serious loading on the treatment plants? One factory could be equivalent to so many houses. So do you think NI Water's doing enough to help those people, that's putting the biggest loading on the treatment plant? Because it's not a house, because a house can only do so much. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that's the concern Martin raised earlier on, that ultimately this is now becoming a commodity that house builders are having the privilege of paying for other industries or farming or cattle marts. There are various things which...
Blame the farmers for that one.
Yeah, I know. So I mean, it is an issue.
There we go.
Where does the cost lie?
People been picked on again.
Yeah, but
does
my point.
polluter pay is another way of...
You can have a lot of inputs into one treatment plant, and one or two businesses could have a massive impact on the size of that plant.
It's cumulative. It's at the moment in time. So it's at the moment in time you go to look for a connection. So if the treatment plant in Dungannon's at capacity and has been for a number of years, then unfortunately then you're held and you can't build in Dungannon. It's as simple as that. I don't know what they're doing in terms of looking at the existing industries.
I think I have more, but I don't know if I'd be allowed. Nature-based solutions. What's
Very
your
quick.
what's your opinion on nature-based solutions that they've been so negative to?
To be honest, we don't understand. Even that idea of the tiny example where I said about a car park sized area of rainfall. Well, that means surely you could then take a piece of hard standing like a car park and turn it into a flower bed, and it's going to absorb that. It's not going to go into the drain system, but yet for some reason that's getting turned down. So there, that's at the tiniest scale. But then you scale that up and say, well, why aren't we doing this? Now, there has been a long-term issue around the adoption of sustainable urban drainage systems, and I understand that the department is bringing forward a consultation maybe this autumn. If that's right, I don't know. There's certainly been talk that that's coming, but there's been talk about that coming for about a decade. In sense, it's been around the houses, but we've never got over the line. And certainly, it seems like this is certainly the time to really push on that and try and make sure that the sustainable urban drainage systems are the number one way of doing it. And then if that doesn't work, we can look to other more hard engineering solutions.
In terms of the sod systems, in the long-term maintenance and so on of those would be a fraction of the cost of the concrete option or the PVC or whatever the other, the current. So the sooner that legislation comes in and Ordinary Water have the ability to adopt those as solutions, the better, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, panel, for coming today and for your presentation. A number of the points I was hoping to make have been made already in terms of mutualisation and developers' contributions, but I want to touch on something you said, Mark, first. You'd said about Northern Ireland Water having the opportunity to borrow against their assets. And I think I've tried to rationalise this in my own head over the last number of months in terms of housing associations are able to borrow against their assets. Could you expand on what that could look like for Northern Ireland Water in practice?
Yes, so when we talk about assets, what we're actually talking about is an income stream. So you're borrowing against an itemised income stream. So at the moment our domestic rates bills don't itemise, but we know that there's to some degree subventing water costs, and we know there's an annual cost there for DFI, which is being paid anyway. So the identification of that becomes a security against which you can borrow. So it's not... NI Water does already borrow against its asset base, the physical asset base. This is borrowing against income stream, and if you're a lender, you would regard that as a very secure income stream because it's underwritten by the Assembly, and the same as social housing. The income stream is underwritten by the Social Housing Development Plan, housing benefit, and rent from occupiers. So it is simply leveraging that secure income stream, but we first need to identify it separately. That's the encumbrance, that's the change in legislation, but the ability to do that, and it's been proven with the Social Housing Development Plan, is that you can then open up a door to third-party lending at very good rates because it's considered to be a very secure income stream. So the model is entirely possible. The due diligence that we need to go into it is very important. The legislation around it will take time, a long time, to get right and needs to be absolutely robust and to satisfy everybody, but we think the models exist.
Is that something that's ever been discussed with the department? Because I think I pushed officials on this a couple of weeks ago and they said that there was something internally and that it hadn't been published. Is this a conversation that's taken place previously?
We've had the discussion with the Minister. We've met the Minister a number of times this year. He was very clear mutualisation was not something he was considering at the start of the year. Our most recent discussion with him, he was ruling out privatisation, so we think therefore, right, there's something between privatisation and mutualisation. There are other models, the cooperative model or the public corporation model. They all need to be examined very carefully to understand the implications. But again, supporting the Audit Office's recommendation to do that, we think that's a very worthy piece of work. The outcome of it can only be decided when the work is done. We shouldn't preempt it, but we think there's certainly opportunity in that.
I would agree. And then secondly, just to touch loosely on something that the Deputy Chair was raising there, I had asked the Minister yesterday about developers' contributions, and I think it's potentially becoming a little bit woollier now in terms of where this could go. He mentioned that he hopes to introduce new legislation on sustainable urban drainage to help store stormwater so it releases more slowly into the wastewater network. What would your initial thoughts on that be, and what would you want the legislation to potentially reflect?
Who's the expert on SUDS?
Yeah, we have it on a site now. Other developers have it on sites more and more now as well. The issue at the minute is that you might build it on your site. It's just it's a natural solution, so it's just basically a grassy slope or whatever with some pipe work in it to catch the rainwater, but the rainwater will filter away as opposed to just all flowing down the pipe at the one time. So it is a natural way of holding back the stormwater. And the issue with some of these sewers is that in a heavy rainfall they get deluged with stormwater, and that causes the problem. So this in theory would hold, or in practice would hold the water back and therefore alleviate that somewhat. The issue at the minute is that Northern Ireland Water cannot adopt those systems, even though there's very little engineering in them and they're an awful lot more straightforward than some of the stuff they do adopt. They don't have the ability to adopt them. So I believe that's what that piece of legislation is, to fix that so that they can adopt them. By adopting them, then it'd make them more attractive, I suppose, to all sorts of developers to actually use those types of systems, as opposed to just using the concrete pipes or whatever that they typically would use. So if that legislation is adopted, I would see that as being a good thing. And I think Northern Ireland Water would obviously welcome it as well.
It's probably worth mentioning, of course, that will only assist in not making the capacity constraints even worse. Going forward, it can only apply to the new homes. Yeah. Last year we built 5,300 homes. This year we think it will be less than 4,000 homes. Probably the least houses we built since the Second World War. So it's only staving off an increase in the already over capacity area. It's not a retrospective piece. It doesn't solve any of the problems we have today. It probably slows down, making the problem worse. So it's not a solution that will help us retrospectively. It's simply staving off the problem for the new homes that can be built, but there's so few of those now due to the general capacity constraint. And again, it's a nice thing to have in the toolkit. It's not a game changer.
It's worth saying that it is tried and tested. Northern Ireland is very behind the game.
Yeah.
We've been doing this in the UK for 20 to 30 years. Every single project we do in England has suds in it, no matter what size it is. It's just what you do. So there's no risk associated with it for NI Water, because all of the problems with it have well been solved. So it's a no-brainer. Just to put it in that tool for going forward.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I was just checking up there. There was the water flooding and sustainable drainage consultation. I think yourselves had responded to that consultation at the time as well. So, but that will be coming through the committee as well at some stage. So no doubt you'll be coming back to us in the course of that legislation whenever it's before us. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming and presenting. I suppose just sort of bringing it back down again, because you've sort of touched on these, but what are the sort of the financial and economic numbers, essentially, from essentially doing nothing, which is where we're at, to doing something, which is where we want to be. So what are the financial economic multipliers or whatever, or dividers, if that may, by doing nothing, I suppose?
Yep, I mean, doing nothing, if things just get worse. I mean, that's kind of where we are. We met in Water. I remember met with Sarah Venning in summer of 2023, and it was all about how can these things be addressed, both short term, medium term, and long term. And then we met again 1 year later in 24, and get the update, and it's like, well, things are worse than they were, and then we're looking at 2025 and looking ahead. Are things going to be worse again? So each time that you're having a slowdown in development, it has this really clear-cut economic impact, just in terms of, I mean, the really straightforward thing in some ways is what happens in the construction sector, because it's just projects don't go ahead, people don't get paid, jobs start to dry up, or you force, it's not necessarily people necessarily lose their jobs, but they're forced to work elsewhere. They have to go. We already have a fantastically strong industry working across England, Scotland, Wales, and the Republic of Ireland, but people want to be working at home. But then it's the really big impact is when you then take, okay, well, that's the house not being developed, but all the supply chain around that, the businesses. We had even an example of startup businesses you have to pay an assessment fee. They were saying, well, look, we can't even pay these fees to get the thing assessed, so we're not going to put our startup in that particular location. Now, so just if you're thinking, well, we want startups in our constituency, but we happen to be a constituency which has a real problem with wastewater treatment. So what are those startups doing? They're going, well, where can we go to where we don't have to pay that fee? We're going to go to that constituency. So it becomes this enormously impactful economic issue that actually forces money into different places. And as Joan says, we're not really seeing the full picture, because you don't see the money that doesn't come in, that people are just put off by. I mean, you often hear, I'm sure in this committee, you often hear about the planning system and how investors look at Northern Ireland's planning system and go, no thanks, it's just too difficult. We're not going to wait for all those years and then get turned down. But this is the new thing. This is like on top of that, another obstacle for people looking to invest. So it's hard to put any sort of like £1 million figure on it. But even like whenever we were going out to members there, and I said about one practice being able to come back with a list of projects totaling £400 million that are all on hold. That's from one architect's practice, and not the biggest practice in Northern Ireland. You know, so it's really the scale of it is phenomenal, and all we know is that unless things start to move, it's going to get worse.
Maybe some immediate impacts, certainly in the house building space. We have members who are telling us that the sites they're building out at the moment are their last sites. These are family businesses, maybe second, third generation. We have contractors who are saying they're going to stop building here, but they're moving to Scotland. We have civil engineering contractors who last year delivered £300 million of work for NI Water, believed they were on a framework for several years at that level, and this year it's been cut virtually to zero. Those are individuals who are now having to work in Scotland or South. The economy minister is on the record himself as saying there are factories in his constituency being held back because of NI Water. We know of one factory which is now going to be built in Poland instead of here with 2,000 jobs. So it's very hard to parcel this all up into individual figures, but anecdotally it really starts to add up, and it's inevitable. I mean, we were talking to the Education Authority recently as well, and their programme for new schools and SEM provision, all of these things are at risk, and those are families and lives and children and jobs. So the totality of what's at risk here is vast. It's very hard to pin a figure on it. But it's not a selfish interest from the construction industry. The construction industry is the enabler of economic development, be it foreign direct investment or organic growth of SMEs in this place. If we're not busy, the economy is stagnant.
Northern Ireland Water have put the figures on their website in terms of 37,000 houses and other ancillaries, but that doesn't include the stuff that Joan's talking about, where people look at here and say, no, I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to come and develop a site, and there's plenty of big sites sitting that can't be developed for various reasons, but one of those main reasons is lack of infrastructure. The other thing, sorry John, just related to that is I believe we're at the start of a housing crisis. We already have a housing crisis, but I think we're at the start of it getting really, really bad, because we can't build social housing because we can't connect to the infrastructure. And that's before we talk about developers contributing to the infrastructure. And there's not enough private houses being built, so the prices have spiked, and you'll notice they'll keep spiking. And added to that, there's no houses to rent either, so rents have absolutely spiked as well over the last few years. So you throw all that into the mix, and the people who have a house now are very lucky, but the next generation won't be able to afford it unless we do something about it. And obviously that's why we're here this morning to talk about this, and I appreciate that, but that's the crux of the issue in housing terms.
And I was just going to mention just that Belfast City Council has identified that they want to build 31,600 homes by 2035. That's 11 years away. They are actually out to tender at the minute for a development partner, and they're going to announce that development partner at the end of November. And they have a plan to build, I think, 1,500 homes in the next couple of years as the first phase of that development. But those homes can't be built if there's no sewage to connect them to. So they're just huge things sitting in the pipeline that just can't happen, but don't exist. They're not in the statistics at the minute.
Thank you. Andrew, do you have another question?
Yeah. Are we on 2 or 3 today? Are we?
Go on ahead, but we are running out of time, members. So please, if you wouldn't mind, just.
I'll give you the 2 questions. You can answer the quickest one first, and then you can, if you have time, then you can go to the other one. Then on the housing one, what is your? I mean, you touched on, I think, Mr. Fox there, just about derelict buildings and can't be developed and stuff. I mean, what is your assessment of the amount and how many could be progressed and how they would be progressed? And then the second question, I'll give them both together just because to accommodate the chair. The nature-based solutions, is there other benefits, not just from the water sort of accommodation, if that makes sense, but I'm thinking, I suppose, in some of these, you see that obviously the gullies at the side of the road go into the drainage system, but obviously they're whatever dirt from the cars and what have you go. Is there any benefits? Can the nature-based solutions filter some of that out, maybe, or is, I mean, just so those are the 2 questions, really: derelict houses and nature-based solutions filtering stuff, Chair.
I mean, just on the nature-based solutions, they can apply to almost any situation, and you do see great public realm schemes in other cities which have the thinking. The number one thought around the public realm scheme is how do we divert the rainwater away from the system, and that's one of the big drivers behind those schemes. Just to give you one example about the conversion of above the shop, really small project, £200,000. You think, okay, that's straightforward. The architect had to get a report produced and had to pay £1,250 to demonstrate that the impact of the new proposal would be less than the existing. And he's going, but it's really obvious it's going to be less. It's like, yeah, but you've got to pay for that. You got to pay to prove that. And of course, pay the money. You show that the impact of this new proposal is going to be less, and eventually it goes ahead. But the whole thing is delayed. The process for those, there needs to be a way of, when we're faced with this enormous difficulty, let's make sure that where there are things that can be, allowed to proceed, that we make that process smoother. In terms of trying to get numbers around this particular part of dereliction, it's impossible, because it's just across all these areas, the 30 areas. You think about every town centre. Our big concern is that dereliction tends to lead to increased dereliction. It brings down a neighbourhood. You have all these. You can have a town centre strategy. You can have your living above the shop strategy. If you don't start the momentum, the ball rolling of bringing an area back up, having people living, having shops live, then the one beside it doesn't come back to life again. The one beside that, and you actually bring the whole area down. So that's why we mentioned the point of dereliction, because it has this knock-on effect. It's not just the one property that doesn't get connected, it actually impacts on the whole street.
Okay, thank you. Cahill?
Thanks, Chair. I thought I wasn't going to get in there. But all the questions have been asked, but I was just trying to put that as quickly and succinct, because, in all the conversations we've been listening to, we all understand there's planning problems, there's funding problems. But my main questions to you, because all of us as elected reps have dealt with all these. We've dealt with some sites, and we've asked questions on these spec tanks or whatever they want to introduce, and I'm familiar with all that. My question to you is, because whilst you presented some good arguments today, and you're part of the solution as well, you know what I mean, to be fair, and that's the way I look at it. In terms of conversations you've had, and it's interesting to hear the conversation with NIW. The department gave the NIW 40% of its budget this year. So, and I think with the utility regulator coming in over the next couple of weeks in terms of the midterm review, which will be very interesting to see how we've got. But I'm trying to move on to a solution issue in where we're at now. Your kiosks, in terms of what we can do now. And to be fair, Mark, I agree with the strategy stuff. Because it crosses the economy and everything else. And this is realistically, this is where we're at. But you're in today to present your arguments from what you contribute into the NIW and into the housing and everything else. And just your key asks the committee, because we've talked about most of the things that the members want to ask anyway. And I do agree with Suds and all.
Sorry, do you need to,
No, Chair, to prefer the 3 or 4 questions the members all got, but the key asks just on, because,
So I think, trying to be very quick, Chair, a couple of parallel asks that can be done at the same time is start that independent expert-led review, and whether that is done by the department or done by this committee, which has powers to look at things, or done by the audit office. But start that appraisal process, because that is going to take time, and the solutions will take a long time, but there's no time like the present to at least say, right, this is the path we're going on. So start that review. In the interim, we do need NI Water to be very open and transparent with the industry, with house builders, with all types of planners. Where there is capacity in their model, we need to have access to that access. The blanket no is killing all economic development. We need NI Water to be very open with us, to work with us, to help us understand their models better. We've had good engagement with them, but we still don't really understand some of what's going on there. So we need full tolerance from NI Water in a partnership approach. And the Minister's approach is partnership, and it's working within the limited envelope that we have. So that approach is fine, but we do need, on that longer term vision, to start immediately a review of what the possible options are. We know there is not sufficient money coming through the block grant. That seems fairly clear at this point. So we do have to find other solutions, because I do believe if we don't find at least some of what NI Water are asking for, and it's absolutely up for discussion, is that a legitimate amount of money to be asking for? Is there a lesser amount that would enable something to proceed? That's all part of that options appraisal. But to do nothing, to be very clear from what you're hearing, the architects are ahead of us in that sausage machine of development. If they stop getting the inquiries, if people are not coming to this place or are not developing their businesses within this place, the economy dies.
I like this question. It's also a really difficult question, but it's where we all need to be focused. There's no point just having a big list of the problems from top to toe and how bad everything is, because there's lots of areas where it's really struggling. But on Mark's point, the key thing is with that expert review, it needs to have a timetable. It needs to have an urgent timetable and an end date by which we're going to see a report. There can't be one of these reviews like we've seen in other areas where you take a year and then the outcome at the end of that is we need another year to do the actual detailed review, The second thing is we need to have equality. We need to have an end to the postcode lottery. Why should it be that one area you get your free connection, another area you have to pay for your connection effectively? That's what's happening right now. We need increased transparency in terms of decision making. Who is going to make the decisions about which areas come into use in the next year, 3 years, 5 years? Who's making those decisions? Because that's going to impact on what schools can go ahead, what housing can go ahead. And it's going to be in different constituencies all across Northern Ireland. It's going to have a very direct impact. We need to have greater transparency. And finally, operational issues. There are improvements. Even in the midst of all this difficulty, there are operational improvements that can be made. We talked about the use of nature-based solutions. We talked about the smaller scale projects, not forcing people to pay these fees that then, one person pays a fee, they don't even get their thing looked at. There are operational issues like that can be really tightened up. They may not make a massive impact in the sort of the big scale, which is those other issues, but they'll make a big difference for those one houses, two houses here. Whenever you get those sorted out, at least those houses are still happening. Much better that happens than it not happening.
Thank you, Cathal. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation and the answers that you've given to quite a range of questions. Now, I suppose in terms of how NI Water are responding to consultations, there's the good, the bad, and the cosmetically different. I've been warned before. Now, I don't dispute that Northern Ireland Water need more money, a lot more money. But is there any suspicion that this has been, I suppose, what we've talked about today has been used as a bit of leverage to amplify that point?
Well, one thing which is really clear cut is the price control process that's been gone through as an independent process has said NI Water needs X amount of money, and they're not getting X amount of money. Yeah. So NI Water might be saying they need much more than that, but they're not even getting the amount that they've been told by somebody independently they need. So I think that's, from our perspective, that's just black and white. That needs to be met to enable the most basic things. We see Paddy Brow's report there about what's happening with Belfast Lough and the amount of raw sewage that's going directly in there and the impact that's having on water quality. It's hard to believe that there isn't a need for just increased funding. Now, does that mean it can't be go hand in hand? Increased funding can't go hand in hand with a proper look at governance or delivery, or those sort of the frustrations that Mark's facing, where policies are shifting, or there's internal working documents that nobody really has sort of an understanding of who came up with that policy. Why is it 5 years for this idea? Who decides that? Does that go through the department? Does somebody have to rubber stamp that? Is that the utility regulator? It's all very. So I think the two things go hand in hand. Yes, right now there just needs to be more money, but we have to then look at how there can be operational improvements and governance improvements at the same time.
Absolutely. In terms of the forthcoming housing supply strategy, I was wondering what involvement you guys had in that. I know there hasn't been great engagement with the Communities Minister to date, but it's worrying if that the publication of that strategy is imminent and you haven't been involved because it's the house ferry isn't going to deliver those houses. So I was wondering, had you had an input into that?
Maybe Mark can speak for CEF, but certainly from our perspective, our engagement was through the public consultation at the time. We were actually saying that where we felt that the housing supply strategy needed to be more ambitious. Whenever you looked at the previous period, we had delivered more houses than was being proposed for this next housing supply strategy period, which we thought was an odd thing, considering that the amount of people facing housing stress has increased. However, we haven't heard anything since, so we're waiting like everybody else to see the final strategy come out. Mark, maybe you've had more?
Yes, so we were involved in the draft strategy about 2 years ago, which didn't quite get to the Assembly, and we're behind some of the data that presented the 10,000 per year target figure. We have actually in the last few days had a response from the Communities Minister as well. We will be meeting him in the coming days, no doubt, to discuss that. So the housing strategy, we were involved in that, but in terms of the delivery of that housing strategy, clearly to us, without resolving this NI water issue, that 10,000 figure looks hopelessly ambitious. As I say, we expect this year, pro rata to the housing completions that have been reported to date, we may be looking at a figure under 4,000 a year this year. Last year was our worst for 60 years. So the housing strategy is worthy. Its ambition is to be supported, and as Kieran says, we might even wish for more, because of all the time that we're not delivering, the backlog, and we believe there's 50,000 or so waiting on the waiting list. I think pro rata that is a worse housing crisis than we see south of the border.
Yeah.
So the housing strategy is vital, but actually without the machinery of NI water underneath it, it becomes relatively meaningless.
Yeah, that's
in terms of the modelling, in a particular, all I would ask is, developers would ask is, if your site's in a particular area, Derry, Belfast, wherever, and you're being told there's no capacity or you can't connect, all we're asking for is transparency. Show us where the problems are, open the books and show us what the model entails and where the issue is, and then at least the developer and the local representatives and NI Water and whoever the stakeholders are could sit down and get together. Probably only works for larger sites, but at least if there was that bit of transparency there and everybody could understand that there is a big problem and the extent of the problem, then you could look at how you might fix it. Ultimately you might not be able to fix it, but at least if that openness was there, that would be a start from a developer's point of view, I believe.
Mark, linked to your question, the other area which this could really wreak havoc is around the local development plans, which are of course going through the system at the moment. There you have housing allocations, and those have to be based on reality. Now at the moment people are saying, well, we want X, Y and Z within our council area, and of course there's a real ambition for growth and development, but yet those numbers aren't going to stack up, and it's going to really make things very, very difficult as those local development plans come through for approval.
The sites we're talking about now are the sites that were zoned 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So
I think, Mark, you said, and I wrote it down, we're heading into an economic wasteland if we continue to underfund Northern Ireland Water by the same amount. Given other executive capital commitments, is there a fear or an inevitability that we might actually be heading into a period where we're underfunding Northern Ireland Water by more? And would you see a role in this for an infrastructure commission if we had one? The executive agreed that the executive office took on responsibility for moving forward with this, that we'd have this commission to oversee major infrastructural projects, and it's hard to think of any more major than the upgrading of our water system.
Yes, very quickly, just in terms of the capital budget, obviously that's consequentials to us. There are some major capital projects in GB which are being abandoned, so we wait to see on the 30th of October and beyond that what actually comes to us, and it's by no means certain we'll even retain what we have, or if we do retain it, that certainly won't increase. The Infrastructure Independent Commissioner role, as you know, is something we're on record as having strongly supported, and it has strong business support as well. Simply in terms of the investment strategy, I know there has been very good work and good cooperation between all the ministries there in terms of prioritising projects, but my point around that one is, whilst they may be the prioritised projects, they're within what's believed to be a finite defined budget. We don't accept that budget is reasonable. That budget is not reasonable to deliver what needs to be delivered, and there needs to be more ambition about looking for alternative sources of funding.
Just one quick one
Very
finally.
quick, yeah.
Northern Ireland Water do have an income stream currently through commercial rates. Just, are they able to borrow against that, or do they borrow against that?
I'm unclear whether they do, but yes, that would be equally fundable. I believe that might be part of their current capacity and may be being utilised, but in parallel, but then obviously that element that we believe can be defined off domestic bills could become an additional securitised funding stream.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. It was really important for us to hear, obviously, in terms of the constraint issues and how that's impacting upon your industries respectively. And it is something that we are concerned about as a committee. Because it does impact upon so much. Infrastructure is such a bedrock of society. But look, we appreciate your time today. I know we've ran over our time, but we appreciate you coming to give us evidence today. So thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, members. Before I move on, I just want to say during that evidence session it was mentioned and one of the key asks was about looking at that audit office report and an inquiry into it and that sort of thing. So the NI Water report from the audit office has been released by PSC, so it is something that, you know, potentially we could give consideration to. And I know that the audit office can support obviously the statutory committees directly and will potentially be coming to the committee at some stage, so it was just maybe to point that out at this stage in relation to that. All right, and members, just to remind you, I don't mind questions, but what I'm not going to tolerate is speeches. So that's why I want to try and come to questions as quickly as possible in relation to when officials are in. I don't want to curtail anybody. I want to give everybody their space to answer the questions, but it will be questions, not speeches. Okay, we're going to move on to. Oh, sorry, yeah.
A topic that came up quite a bit there was about the independent expert-led infrastructure commission, which I've actually been looking into in terms of asking questions about it. And I understand it's with the executive office, not the Department for Infrastructure. And would it be appropriate for the committee to maybe write to the executive office committee to kind of find out where that's at, or I mean, do we write to the minister about where that's at? Because it feels as if it would sit quite nicely within infrastructure, but 3 years after it was announced, it still isn't introduced. So can we maybe get an update on that?
Well, do you want to write to the committee and our infrastructure?
Whatever would be more recommended or appropriate. I haven't proposed this before, so.
Sure. If it sits with the committee for the executive office, the committee can write directly to the executive office and just copy it to the executive office committee as courtesy.
That'd be brilliant.
If that's the approach that the committee wants to take.
Happy with that? Okay, anything else? Okay, happy to move on. Okay, item 8 is the review of the South East Flooding Autumn 2023 Department for Infrastructure Oral Evidence at page 190. You'll see the review of the South East Flooding Autumn 2023 Department for Infrastructure Oral Evidence at page 194. You'll see the review of South East Flooding Autumn 2023 Department for Infrastructure Written Evidence, and at page 199 you'll see the review of South East Flooding Report Autumn 2023. So welcome to the committee Mr. Jonathan McKee, Director Rivers Development Department for Infrastructure, Mr. Gary Quinn, Director Rivers Operations Department for Infrastructure, and Mr. James Kelly, Head of Rivers Operations Department for Infrastructure. So again, members, I'm just seeking agreement that the evidence is recorded by Hansard. Agreed, yeah? Okay, and I'm just, obviously we have the report and I know members have been eager to go through it and look at it for themselves as well. So we do have that. So just a brief 5-minute opening statement please, and then I'm going to come to members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair and Committee. Thank you for this invitation today and for the opportunity to update the Committee following the publication of the report into flooding of the South East in autumn 2023. My name is Gary Quinn and I'm Acting Director of River Operations, and I'm joined today with Jonathan McKee, Director of Rivers Development, and James Kelly, Head of Rivers Operations. I suppose it's quite poignant that we're here today, almost 1 year on from the flooding event, to present these details on the finding of the report and to offer the Committee the opportunity to ask questions around that. I intend to provide a very brief summary. I'll try and keep it, Chair, to within the 5 minutes if I can. I trust that you've all been provided with a copy of the report to familiarise yourselves with the contents. By way of background, I think it's important just to explain, I suppose, the extreme event that it was in the south and east. Northern Ireland experienced its wettest May to October on record since 1890. In other words, the wettest 6 months in over 130 years. October was then exceptionally wet, with double the normal monthly rainfall. Storm Babette occurred in mid-October, and it unleashed somewhere in the region of 100 to 150 millimetres of rain on the Mournes. This was then followed by another significant downfall of 100 to 180 millimetres of rainfall across the region at the end of the month. This exceptional series of events led to flooding to over 600 properties, including 200 homes. I think it's important to point out why we needed this review. The last review was conducted in 2017. That was the one in the northwest flooding, where a number of homes and properties were impacted there. Really, the scale of this and the nature of this event triggered a joint organisational learning review, and that was led and chaired by myself under the auspices of the Flooding Review Group. That was in keeping with the Northern Ireland Civil Contingencies Framework. There were a number of people participated in the review, so it was important that we had a widespread involvement that was across the department, the Executive Office, Department for Infrastructure and Department for Communities, but it also contained representatives from DAERA, it contained representatives from Newry and Mourne and Down District Council, as well as ABC Council, and as well as the Emergency Service and Civil Contingency Partners. It was a large piece, it was a very large multi-agency piece, and the importance of that cannot be overstated. We also enlisted the help of an independent engineering consultant by the name of Jacobs. It's important because there's a lot of hydrometric information that was gathered and captured. The report itself, as you know, it runs to some 90 plus pages with an executive summary and an appendice, which really details a lot of detail around the rainfall and what occurred over that period in time and the causation factors. The importance of the review, I suppose, if we look at it from two distinct angles, one is really looking at it from the preparation, response and recovery from a multi-agency perspective, and the other lens that we looked at it from was from the technical components. What caused the flooding in each of the areas? I mean, if you consider the review, we really looked at the four major urban areas that were impacted. We looked at Downpatrick, we looked at Newcastle, we looked at Portadown, and we looked at Newry City. But we appreciate that there was widespread flooding across a wider geographical area that existed from North down right across to Armagh. But those were the main towns that were impacted. The importance of the review, like those before it, it provides a look back at events to help us shape the future. It needs to be considered as a springboard to help us make further improvements, not only within flood risk management, but also civil contingency arrangements. Not to go too deep into the report, but just to give you a flavour of what it contains. As I said, it's 90 plus pages. It looks at the probability of rainfall and floods and tries to explain those. It looks at the timeline of events in terms of what led us into the emergency event and how we responded and when we stood up our major emergency response plan and so on. It also looks at existing and proposed defences at each location. It looks at the multi-agency roles, responsibilities and the debriefs that occurred during the preparation of this report. And it looks at the likely causes of flooding by area and the performance of the existing defences. As you may know, some of your colleagues attended stakeholder engagement days, which happened in Newry, Downpatrick and Portadown on the 27th and 28th of March. It was very important to capture some of the background and information, particularly for those that were attending within Downpatrick, Portadown and elsewhere during the course of the event. The report's key findings are documented in our letter, but I'll just go over those for completeness if you don't mind, Chair. So the existing flood defences performed well in the four towns of Downpatrick, Newcastle, Newry and Portadown, which are most impacted by severe flooding. In Newcastle and Newry, existing drainage systems were overwhelmed by the sheer volume of water experienced in Newry and Newcastle. And in Downpatrick, the coiled tidal barrier, which plays a vital purpose in protecting Downpatrick from tidal flooding, served its purpose. However, the limiting factor to the drainage of the coiled river, as many of you will know, is the average level of Strangford Lough. In Newry, the canal was operated effectively during the flood, but there are limitations around the canal for flood storage. I appreciate that's a very short synopsis, but we're happy to answer questions on any aspect. In addition to stakeholder engagement, we presented the draft publication at an open public open days in June 2024, again in the same venues of Portadown, Downpatrick and Newry. A total of around 60 attendees were in attendance, and that gave them an insight in terms of what the report would look like. The final report was published on the 30th of July and it contains 22 recommendations shared across 2 areas. And as I mentioned earlier, 12 of those areas look at the multi-agency response, and 10 of those recommendations look at flood defence, drainage systems and other technical aspects. The key recommendations from the report, in summary, are to consider the viability of a flood forecasting and warning system for Northern Ireland, the need to build community resilience and responsive to flooding, and to consider how best residents and businesses are better informed about insurance and financial assistance. There's also an examination of organisational resilience of partners, an improvement of the education and awareness of flooding, and I'll not go down through the rest of them because I appreciate that you may have questions and comments in and around that. Again, we're happy to discuss these further, and just to conclude my opening statement, it's important to see this report as a look back at events. It's critical for us all, not just in flood risk management, but for the multi-agency community. It helps us to put forward improvements in flood risk management. It helps us to maintain the profile and importance of this work across the public and government, especially in light of climate change and the potential for increased episodes of this nature. I can point to examples across Europe. Many in this room will have seen those examples of severe flooding across Europe this year. So this report's very important to us. It serves as a reminder of the difficulty and impacts that can occur, and not only that, it follows on from the reports that we had seen in 2017 and 2015 and 16 and 2012. So it supports the idea that we need to be focused on flood risk management and its importance to society here as a whole. Chair, that concludes my opening statement.
Thank you. We appreciate your time and coming, and I'm sorry that you're coming in just slightly late. It was ran over, but just to ask, obviously this report is coming after the event. How often do you do reports like this across? This is the southeast area, but how often do you do reports like this across the regions in Northern Ireland?
This is the last major report. The last major one was 2017. We would look critically. The more recent flooding occurred in 2022 in Eglinton and Drumna. So we would look internally at that, and we would have conversations with our multi-agency partners, but we wouldn't necessarily produce a report of this scale. It was really the size and impact and the extreme nature of this event that triggered the report. And we're led in that we have conversations with the Executive Office just around the scale and complexity of the event, which leads to a report of this nature and size.
So how are we going to measure the outcomes of this report?
Very good question. I think we would base them on the recommendations. That there are 22 recommendations. How successful we are in implementing those recommendations, I think, would be the key.
What's the time scale for implementing them?
Some of them are quick wins. Some of them we're working away to try and resolve as quickly as possible. Others are much more complex in their origin and require conversations and discussions with other departments. Ultimately, we would like to see them all concluded within 24 months. I know it may seem like a long time, but if you look back at the previous report, and the amount of work that was required, I suppose, and engagement that's required with others, we see that as a reasonable time frame. Although that said, there is a flooding review recommendations group, and they will form a timeline and they'll provide more detail around individual, a project management plan, if you like, for the individual aspects of that.
So the matrix for successful outcomes is the success of how they've been implemented?
I would say so. I'll maybe bring Jonathan in here just because he's been involved with previous reports, so he would have a better insight, I suppose, into how those evolved and were incorporated within flood risk management plans.
Because the reason I ask this is success might look very different to the department and to people on the ground.
Okay. In terms of flood risk management, maybe just to take a step back, the two documents that really guide our work are our flood risk management plan that runs from 21 to 27 and our 10-year asset management plan that runs from 2020 to 2030. That gives us the focus for all of the areas that are at flood risk here. This review is generated because there has actually been a flooding incident. So the driver for this is because flooding actually occurred in an area. So they don't routinely happen every so many years the way that the flood risk management plan would. It's the umbrella document. The recommendations are very clear in around progression of schemes, provision of flood forecasting, Actual tangible benefits that society will know if they're in place or not, so it'll be easy to measure whether they're provided. The benefits of that in past reviews, for example, was to develop community resilience. We've done that. That has proven to be successful. We've invested more in our hydrometric infrastructure. So that's infrastructure that monitors water levels on rivers. It allows us then to respond and to tell communities what river levels are whenever there's an emergency. So these are really practical, tangible infrastructure investments that people can see that they're in place, so therefore the access is easy to understand and to measure. There's other recommendations around communication, and we've made big improvements in recent years around communication of flood risk, the production of flood maps, engaging with communities and explaining their risk. We get feedback from them as part of that open engagement then as to how successful that is, which allows us then to tailor our approach. So if we initially engage with a community and we find that the message isn't really being properly understood, we're maybe not explaining it well enough, then we can adjust our style so that the recommendation then is ultimately successful.
Okay, so you mentioned flood maps there. How often are they reviewed, and how often does engagement take place with councils in relation to flood mapping? I know this is a broader question obviously than just, but we're looking at a lot of homes and an awful lot of businesses that were flooded during this particular incident.
So the flood risk management plan that I mentioned earlier, it runs for a 6-year cycle. Within that 6-year cycle there are key milestones every 2 years. So for the first 2 years you make a critical assessment or reassessment of the areas of known flood risk. Then in the next 2 years you would undertake a review of flood maps, and then in the last 2 years you actually review the overall plan again. So the flood maps are reviewed once every 6 years. They also can be reviewed if we have a significant flooding event and we get more information that could inform or change our mapping, and it also can change if there was an alteration to our climate change guidance, for example, which would then cause us to reconsider the flows that might occur in a watercourse as a result of climate change, which then in turn might make the map bigger, the overall climate change flood map. And then we would communicate that by obviously sending that information out into the community resilience groups, into our key stakeholders. Even this week we're having a social media campaign here to try and promote our flood map. So we're getting that information out as far and wide as we can, and hopefully that in that way, not just public bodies and so forth, but communities at flood risk can start to appreciate the extent, if any, that they're subject to flood risk.
Okay, last question from me on this, but it is around the community resilience groups. I mean, I do have concerns as a representative that those community resilience groups are not actually that resilient when it comes to a flood incident, and I feel sometimes that often it's all on the community for their response to a flood incident. What tangible support can be given from agencies whenever it comes to a flood incident, whether it be South East, whether it be Londonderry, Fermanagh? Because during that time when an incident is happening, the communities are up in arms. They're just trying to protect their own homes and livelihoods.
I'll maybe ask Gary to come in a minute, Chair, but the community resilience piece that we have developed here has been going for just over 10 years, and each community is different. Each community's appetite for resilience is different. Their understanding of what they can and can't do is different, and we tailor that to suit. And some are more resilient than others, absolutely. But this isn't government stepping away from its responsibilities and just leaving it all in the community. This is an extra layer of support. So because a resilience group is in place doesn't mean that we won't respond, or that we'll respond less, or that we'll have less resources to respond. This is an extra layer of support. So anything that they can do is a positive step forward. Now, the type of support that we can offer is obviously to engage with them and share with them information around weather forecasts and weather warnings that we would use to gear up our own emergency response, help them develop community plans, help them with remote sandbag storage. If it's of benefit, provide them with a water level text alert system. So those are all practical, tangible steps that communities can avail of and use, and that helps them be alerted in time and help them deploy what resources that they can readily access themselves. So anything that we can do to help them within our own responsibilities, we will do that. It's in our interests to be as supportive as we can. So, Gary, maybe you want to add something more?
Yeah, I think we provided the committee with a list of those groups, I suppose, and as John says, some are more proactive than others. I think what you tend to find is where areas have been, where there's some degree of recurrent flooding, they're more active than other areas. I suppose Eglinton and Drumna is probably a good example of that. We have a really good community group there in Eglinton. We've tried to re-engage with those since the flooding. We've been engaging very closely with the Newry Regional Community Resilience Group. We've had some conversations with Downpatrick, and we're meeting with Newcastle again on Friday, and James is leading that. We will offer whatever support we find. The Newry piece is slightly different in that it's more led by businesses, so we're finding new challenges around that piece. But we're trying to rise to that challenge in the sense, and we'll try and do whatever we can within the resources that are available to help those people. We're in a space, I suppose, between where we would like ultimately to develop a flood forecasting centre, and you'll have seen that in the recommendations. But in the interim piece, it's about having the communication. It's about having that text alert system, as Jonathan talks about. And it's about providing those interim measures until we get to a point in time where we have a fully functioning, well-developed piece that reaches out right across Northern Ireland, I suppose, not just to the communities that have been impacted, because what we will see with climate change is this can happen anywhere. It happened to happen in the south and east, but that's what we really need to be prepared for going forward in the future. So it all ties together. It is a large jigsaw.
Okay, I'm going to move to the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose part of my question's been asked because it is around multi-agency, cross-departmental and then community response. So I just want to focus, I represent the coastal area, so Carrickfergus and Larne, for example, and we've seen, regrettably, with rising rainwater and rising tides, more and more coastal flooding. Unfortunately, when the response happens, it feels more like accident than by design. So I'm just keen to get a flavour for when that happens. Who is the overall czar? Who's coordinating that response? Because I've seen myself with other volunteers just rocking up with sandbags because no one really knows who's the first port of call whenever that happens. Is it the department? Is it the council? Is it a combination of 3 or 4? And who's coordinating it?
We're the lead government department for flooding, so yes. We were in the coordination role early on. If you look back at the example of what happened in South and East, the PSNI took the lead role, particularly because of the flooding that occurred in the early stages, but then we took on that role. So we are leading. We lead from a strategic command perspective, and we led and we met over 14 or 15 times during the course of that period. In relation to the coastal piece, I mean, a good example would have been this weekend, where we did lead. We led from the front. We knew the coastal piece is slightly different, and then you tend to get more of a heads up. You get we get daily forecasts from Aberdeen in terms of tidal and in terms of surge events. So we were able to prepare. We took some precautionary measures along the Cutter's Wharf there in Stranmillis, and so we do get a wee bit more time on it. The difficulty then is how it falls out. The South and East event, you had the extreme rainfall. We knew that was coming, but we didn't know exactly how that was going to fall out. We had all of our engineers primed for a situation that could see rainfall anywhere in Northern Ireland. It so happens that the Mournes then got an amber warning at one stage and further rain fell, so we had to divert our resources to there. We do take the lead. We're in the lead on that, but we do have many conversations with our multi-agency partners, and that stood up. It's perhaps not seen. Maybe that's an issue that we'll have around communication and how we communicate the work that goes on behind the scenes. Much of our work is unseen, it's fair to say.
And look, granted, it's maybe more sporadic in those coastal areas, and I appreciate the work that happened at the weekend. I'm talking more about protecting homes and whenever that happens and that instant reaction. I'm just curious to know where the emergency services rule steps in versus the councils versus your people power on the ground on those initial minutes after people start getting flooded.
So we will have those calls. We have a local impact assessment call, and I'll maybe turn to James just to give you an example of what happened over the weekend, because it probably best illustrates how we respond to events such as that.
Thank you, and thanks for your question. So we get a weather warning from the Met Office a certain amount of times out. We get coastal warnings or coastal updates, coastal alerts every day regarding the coast and the shore. Also, if there's a severe weather coming, a severe weather warning coming, we'll see that initiated. We'll see that shared from the Met Office. And if it's a medium impact warning, there's a matrix there, and if it reaches a certain threshold, that's a catalyst for a call where we get our partners together, coordinated by our resilience colleagues, and we'll have all of the relevant people involved, councils, blue lights, ourselves, other parts of the department and other departments who are all come together for. And it's all about, and it's the same with people on the ground. It's all about shared awareness of what's coming, shared awareness of what might be coming, and that everybody has a check-in. These things inevitably happen at the weekend. That everybody has a check-in to see where we are with our own severe weather, depending if it could be a wind event, could be a surge event, could be rain event, could be different. So there's different sort of parts in the severe weather action plans that different stakeholders and multi-agency partners will alert to. If it's a threat to life, as Gary says, the potential for a threat to life, then the police will lead that.
Okay.
And if it's a less significant event than that, then we'll be the lead government department for severe weather. And that's not to say anybody else is we're given a way to. We're sort of coordinating what the others are doing. Everybody's still responsible for what they're responsible for, but it's just to come together and have that focal point and agree what the plan is and what we'll do.
Thanks, Ian. And maybe just to illustrate again, in November 22 we had a tidal event that occurred in Belfast. You mightn't have heard of it because we dealt with it, but it moved from an issue of flooding to an issue of risk because it occurred around Halloween. There were a lot of party goers in and around Belfast at the time, so that moved then to PSNI taking control of that because of the risks therefore. That there could have been, particularly with the night in question that it was.
That's useful to know. Thank you very much, Chair.
And I have to say I was fascinated at the weekend watching the tidal defences go up at Lurgan, with those. I was watching some of the videos. It was really interesting to watch. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to crack on until you tell me how I'm wished. You know what I mean? So, and thank you, gentlemen, for coming. And touch on it in a minute. But when it comes to communication, you have been very good. I've been in communication with you at various times, and I do appreciate that. So do. Listen, I suppose really, and it is timely because we are a year, and I'm not going to lie. A lot of residents are hypersensitive, and quite rightly so. Okay. What specific solutions are currently being looked at by way of the surface flooding issues in Newry and Newcastle, which affected residents?
In relation to surface water,
yeah, because surface water flooding was attributed as the cause. What solutions are being looked at?
Yeah. So that has to be taken forward as part of the recommendations within the group because it involves not only ourselves but it involves NI Water and it involves roads. So there's a combination of factors there. That is one of the recommendations that sits within the report. We have had some preliminary discussions with those agencies, and we're meeting again, and will meet with local communities. We've met with Downpatrick, we've met with Newry, and we're meeting with Newcastle on Friday to sort of expand upon the issues around that, to problem solve and to bring it forward into the recommendations in a meaningful way that responsibility agencies take action. Jane or Jonathan?
Yes, as you know, we're looking at developing flood alleviation proposals for Newry and Downpatrick, and particularly in Newry they're well developed because they had commenced earlier. As we work through the proposals to deal with flooding from the river, then it becomes more obvious as to where your real surface water problems are and what infrastructure might be needed. The recommendations in the review then are really timely because as we are working forward in those schemes and identifying, well, this area is going to be an issue in terms of surface water and so is this, we can then bring the recommendation to bear, and that will allow ourselves, other parts of the department and NI Water to come together to see what can be done in around some of the surface water issues, whether that's a need to upgrade pumping stations to actually lift water up and out over the defences and into rivers that might be at a higher level. Those are all the technical solutions that may be viable or may not be, but we most definitely are focused on that because as we take forward our flood alleviation programme, and there's a lot of investment that's needed here in terms of flood risk management, it's going to really put a spotlight on what remains, i.e. the surface water problem. So we just can't invest in infrastructure that deals with flood risk from the sea or from rivers, and then society feel that they're still subject to flood risk because there's still a surface water issue. So the recommendations in the review are really timely and helpful in that regard, and that'll be something that we'll be most definitely focused on.
It is good to know, but it is, I'm going to say it out loud, but it is, you talk about 24 months, it was 3 years previous that Newcastle had a flooding event, so these things aren't you know, they're not 1 in 50-year events anymore. You know what I mean? So, and again, we've touched on it, but again, it needs to be said out loud in that regard. Anyway, what more by way, and I've asked, and I will continue to ask, but what way of interim measures are being looked at in regards to Downpatrick? Okay, I mean, you know, we haven't had it too bad in October with rainfall. The fields aren't flooded the way they were previously, but, you know, what interim measures, I mean, it's in the report, but what interim measures are being looked at to put at ease some of the residents and constituents in Downpatrick?
There are two parts here to give a full answer. One is what the department has been doing since last year, and the other then is some of the detail around the complexity of developing a flood alleviation scheme so that we get actually a proposal that's right. So maybe Gary, if you and James would deal with the interim piece, and then
I suppose on a wider piece, and because we have to look at this as a wider piece, not just Downpatrick piece, we're looking at this right across the country. I suppose we've accelerated the Downpatrick feasibility study and we've communicated to you on that. Our capital teams are driving forward the Portadown and Uri flood alleviation schemes. Our ops teams have been very busy immediately after the flooding. We removed a lot of detritus and debris. Now, we're not saying that caused the flooding, but it was because of the impacts of the flooding that we had to remove those. And we have enhanced maintenance, I suppose, across the Downpatrick, Uri and Portadown areas in respect of that. We've brought that forward. James, if you want to maybe add.
Yeah, I suppose Downpatrick in particular has got its own bespoke set of circumstances with the coil barrier there and keeping Strangford Lock out, and that being the limiting factor really in water levels down in that part. Having the coil barrier itself, 14 flap valves there, having cleaned those tidal gates, serviced them all again, reset them again, fresh, make sure that they're functioning properly. There's a couple of fish passes there. We've put a couple of new motors on them to make sure that they remain fully automatic to maximise the potential for discharge there. The plank drain, there's been plank drain, you'll be familiar, others may not. There's been maintenance done on it to remove any potential blockages there and across the summertime, picking out weed. You know, weed doesn't necessarily cause a hydraulic problem, but it can cause concern from people who are looking at the watercourse, and so removal of material there, and also in the Salt Street stream as well. And then in the Coyle River itself, you'll be aware of the work that was done removing material which was carried down to the various bridges and gates and things that were across at the time, and through the event itself they were ongoing because they kept coming. So even over recent months as well, more work there, just material that could come in, or trees or overhanging branches or things which have the potential to maybe compound difficulties or cause concern, trimming those back as well in an environmentally sensitive manner, and also for some of the wider stretches of the coil there where there's maybe potential for material to build up. We have, and beyond the reach of our long reach machines, we have an amphibious vehicle out there of late, just making sure that any other weed or any other accumulations of stuff that could accumulate and potentially cause a flooding problem in that coil barrage or at either of the bridges upstream. Some of them have got good spans. Killalay Road, Coil Road Bridge isn't too bad, but the Belfast Road Bridge is a bit narrower. So just really keeping an eye on it, doing our maintenance, doing our inspections, and satisfying ourselves that it has the capacity that's available to it. It is limited, I suppose, by the constraints that are there, the bridges and things that are there. But the main constraint is that coil barrier itself and Strangford Loch, and keeping that out. I'm not sure if it brings any comfort or not, but the flooding emergency that occurred last year was a series of a sequence of significant heavy rainfall events compounding things one after the other, and Gary had explained the rarity of those events and the significant rainfall that came with them and the problems that they created. So we've also mentioned the feasibility studies and the longer term things that are coming, and I suppose the maintenance work that's going on there, but I suppose maybe even more immediately for people who are there, engaging with the community, see if we can establish, I've engaged in there fairly recently last week with the Downpatrick Regeneration Working Group, looking to gather together contacts so we can establish that connection, those communications, sharing those messages, pointing at rain warnings and alert and shared awareness, so people can make decisions themselves based on this improved awareness, hopefully, that they will have. familiarisation, the communications, the sharing of the messages, and also maybe even considering even further than that, like we have in other areas, maybe a couple of stores maybe for sandbags that could be there in the community, not to replace the responsibility or the duty of any others to respond, but to help those who are on site with an initial reaction until others come. So various different things there, and also there's the potential for homeowners to apply for the homeowner flood protection scheme, and that's property level protection for homes that flooded homeowners can consider. And that another thing that has happened this year is that on the instruction of the Minister, we've reviewed that homeowner flood protection scheme and the criteria for it to make it available maybe to more people than previously it might have. To try and relax that. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, just going to come in the back. I just maybe close out on that question, if you don't mind. I
Very
suppose just
briefly,
the other things
yeah.
that we've done. So homeowner flood, we recognise that there needs to be interim measures. We recognise that, in these extreme events, that, that there could potentially be further flooding. So that's why we opened the eligibility criteria. I think there's some conversations in this room before about just how awkward it was and how bureaucratic it was. So we hope that we've lessened the burden there for people. In addition to that, we've availed of additional funding. We've quickly replenished our stocks. We looked to, I think we took about £1.2 million to improve our plant and equipment. We've learned a few lessons around this as well. Just the scale and intensity. We had to move people from all over the country down to Downport. So we're trying to improve that in terms of resilience piece, because if it does happen again, we'll need that. And also that we have appropriate training. We've updated our internal procedures and our major emergency response plan, just in light of everything that happened around, because it was a very large single nature event. As we talked about, the previous one was 2017, and even that one wasn't as impactful as this one. I mean, the sheer economic damage that was suffered was much greater than that suffered in the northwest.
Okay, Andrew, do you want one last question?
Yeah, okay, just I need to choose one now, so we'll do.
I'll come back to you if I have
No.
time.
You have mentioned about communications, and you mentioned sort of the downwards, to the groups and such like, and that's grand. I think we will get more in that. I mean, you mentioned Friday. Hopefully, it'll be there on Friday, and we'll see what comes out of it. So we'll not preempt that anymore. But there is, how do with regards to the flood review group and the bi-monthly meetings. And I thought, how do you communicate with other agencies within DFI to make you reference your own maintenance, but how does other agencies' maintenance within the DFI, be it roads, be it NI water or such, is that communicated across the ways to sort of make sure that those things are being cleared out in order to make sure that the surface water flooding isn't an issue, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. I mean, it's been communicated. They've been asked a series of questions. I know certainly political representatives have held their feet to the fire, other organisations in terms of their maintenance responsibilities. We as a department can't tell our colleagues, but we would give them, information in respect of concerns that political representatives would have. So we pass all that information across, and we do have those conversations. I think what you'll get in the flooding review recommendation is you'll get a piece which is more formalised than that. You tend to have communications individually from areas, from political representatives, from local contact that we would have within rivers, talking to roads, talking to NI water. But I think that the review piece, or the review piece, formalises all that and means that it has to be recorded and actioned against it.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
You can understand, though, from a public perspective, before I come to Cahill, within a department, it doesn't even seem like people are speaking to one another.
Maybe, Chair, if I can come in. There are good lines of communication between ourselves and our colleagues in roads and NI water. And there's a group called the Flood Strategy Steering Group, which allows us to chair all of the drainage organisations and bring to the attention issues that would emerge. Because of the importance of this review, there's a separate governance group that's been set up, which will again give us further opportunity to get the messages that Andrew's talking about across into the ears of the other flood risk management organisations. But I haven't fully answered your question at the very outset, Andrew, and I'll do it briefly, Chair, in that we've carried out a lot of work since the flooding last year to give our infrastructure its very best opportunity to take water away from communities. We're developing flood alleviation proposals in Downpatrick and Newry and Portadown and many other locations. it takes quite a while to develop those proposals, and very often there's a perception that government's dragging its feet or going slowly, and that is absolutely not the case. Previous generations have invested in areas and carried out the easy to do schemes. What's left now for us to do is to revisit some of these areas and see, are there any further works that can be provided? And that's a really challenging piece of work, because economic viability then becomes a real issue, in that the cost of the works is far greater than the damages that you're trying to avoid. And rather than just close the file and say there is no scheme, we actually keep the books open, so to say, to do everything that we can to try and find a viable proposal for communities like Drumna and Eglinton are classic examples of that. On the surface of it, it seems that these schemes are taking years. The reality of it is they're very complex, and we're doing our best to find a solution. In terms of Downpatrick, it'll be a similar process there, and we've accelerated that. So we've carried out the surveys and we're looking at the optioneering. But there's a gap between a flooding event, us then responding quickly to do the maintenance, and then a scheme being delivered. And in that gap, that's where the community resilience piece is the best thing that can be done to make communities aware that this is a risk that they're going to be living with for the rest of their lives, either living or working in an area. We can't give an assurance that an area will never flood again. We can't. It's unwise to put that message out there or to give communities that message. Flood risk is only going to increase, and we need everyone's help, including elected members, to get the message out that government needs to be cohesive around this, which brings us right back to the point about the surface water issue and how that we all need to work together to tackle all the sources of flooding, and we'll do our very best to do that.
Thank you. Cahill.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation. Just on that, John, I mean, what's your assessment of the preparedness of the agencies? I know you're doing a specific point, but I mean, we've had floods in the past, and that's one question. The other one is, and it's on the community resilience. How exactly is the department working with communities to build that up? And my final point then is, in terms of financial supports, has the department the capacity to help people with the grants process, and what's been the uptake so far? That's the three questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, you wouldn't mind repeating your first question there?
Well, no, the first one's about the preparedness of the statutory agencies, to be fair, you know what I mean? Because we've all been there and we've all had the sandbags and everything else. And it's an interesting point to James on who takes responsibility, and just the preparedness of the agencies.
Thank you. So, you're all aware that the review has been published. Some have welcomed it. We're obviously pleased to have it as a document that we can see as a springboard. There has been some criticism of the review and criticism of the multi-agency response, and I think it's important just to put on record what went well. The fact that we were completely switched on to the weather that was coming. Preparations were being made the weekend before. The communication around the response was good. The cooperation from our multi-agency partners was good, and that just doesn't happen, just spontaneously. We have spent years developing multi-agency response plans, really from 2012. To the point now where other organisations and other administrations would see that we have used our small regional size to our advantage. So there's short communication lines, lots of personal relationships in organisations, and lots of commitment from people. So the multi-agency response is really effective. My view is it's as good as it can be, but the difficulty in responding to flooding is, you do not know what areas are going to start to flood first. You're faced with real operational scenarios like, there's a rapidly evolving situation in the southeast. Do you commit all your resources into the southeast, and then the weather was to turn perhaps into the west, for example, and you found that you've stripped out all your resources from the west and you're left vulnerable there? So the emergency response for flooding can never be perfect. The big question is it as good as it can be? And my view is that it is. You talked there then just about financial support and whether we could assist in that. So far, councils in the Department of Economy have been involved in that. The expertise that we have in rivers is best focused in delivering the responsibilities that we have, which is helping to build the emergency response capacity, helping the community resilience capacity, and pushing on with these schemes. We have a limited number of people. If we diversify into assistance with grants, that's only going to take people away from the delivery of the projects that we need. So my honest view to you all is that we are better focusing on what we currently have on our books at the moment, and letting the other organisations who have expertise in the administration of grants and support, let them come in and help in that regard.
Fair enough. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Cahill. Danny?
Thank you, Chair. James answered comprehensively. Did Andrew a lot of what I was going to actually ask, so I'll not make you repeat yourself. So let's take it a different sort of direction. When I used to be a councillor in Belfast City, in Belfast, very good at alerting councillors to weather warnings or possible events that could be happening in Belfast. And I suppose just wondering around the community resilience, is that uptake, which is no across all councils, that approach? Because I know at Belfast we're always very good at that there when emergency situations were happening.
Yeah. So we have about 40 of these groups, but very much they're led by places that have been impacted by flooding. You know, and that's the difficulty. I suppose really it ties in, it's fair to say, Jonathan, that it ties in with our flood risk management plan over the next week. Those are the same areas that have been identified within the plan. So but there does need to be a proactiveness within the community around that. We will certainly, we're willing to help, we're willing to give all that information through the tax alert systems and the emails where people would come forward. New people would come forward. We have the established 40 odd groups, but we can see that those groups growing at the moment. You know, if that's maybe 43, 44 groups now.
Yeah, and I know I've said it before, it was something that actually came out of being a councillor, was up where I live and represent. You know, flooding wouldn't be like a major incident, as in like a business all thing, but one home being flooded is one too many. So having the sandbags ready and able to access as a community is a huge help. And you know, you're watching over the weekend there, and I've no doubt you've had a real busy weekend and you were doing really good work. But we were ready as well, just in case the wind turned into something completely different, because it can change within an hour. We went from yellow to amber within.
Sorry, Danny.
Yeah. I know I'm not.
Is there a question there?
No, it's just about that building of that resilience. I know, that makes sense.
To be fair.
Yeah. But I suppose good work being done as well. Sometimes when you see the big events, then it's easy to point fingers.
Yeah. Thank you, and we do appreciate the work that does go on. Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, man, for coming in and outlined again, I suppose, that the difficulties that you have as an agency and all agencies have working together responding to flood events. That's the case, literally it doesn't rain, but it pours. Jonathan, you said that you're content that the response was and is as good as it can be. You're always going to be open to criticism, and I think a lot of that comes from maybe the trauma experienced by victims of the flooding as well. But it's as good as it can be. You say, do you mean it's as good as it can be given the resource that you have, or would a bigger resource lead to a better response?
It's entirely possible that there could be a rainfall event that would cause flooding of such a magnitude that it would overwhelm our ability to respond, our multi-agency partners' ability to respond, and infrastructure. That's entirely possible. Obviously, with more people and more resources, you can do more things. I'm still of the view that the emergency response last October was effective and was an appropriate response. Where we would have run into difficulties if Storm Kieran had have came across Ireland, it didn't. That would have resulted in very significant amounts of rainfall, and that would have really tested the resilience of our teams. There were team members who were given everything that they had, cancelling family events, working extremely long hours, just to do their very best for the communities that they live and work in. You know, a lot of our staff, particularly our operational squads, they live in the areas that were being flooded. They know the people, they know the shop owners, so there's a real commitment there. Because of the fact that we don't know the scale of a potential catastrophic flood that might come, that's where I think we need to move into the space of recognising that the emergency response could be overwhelmed and starting the conversation around living with flooding. How do we make communities resilient? How do we make people aware of, whenever they are recovering from a flooding emergency, to perhaps change their infrastructure so that it does recover from a flood faster the next time? These are difficult and alarming conversations, but it's the reality, and for us not to start to grapple with them now, I believe is going to disadvantage a future generation. And you mentioned criticism. Yes, absolutely, there are people who suffer from flooding, and we hear and I think the proper term is their grief at the loss of their property and their possessions and the impact on their businesses, and we accept that. It's difficult though when you read in the press, you know, that the review could have been written by primary school children. That's clearly not true. It's not helpful. And our teams and the professional expertise that they have, you know, we are human beings also who put a lot into this, so that needs to be respected, I think, is an important point. But those who suffer, the Newry business community, for example, we've met with them, their attitude to pick up and keep going again is exemplary, and we'll do all that we can within our gift to support them.
Yeah, thank you.
I like the way we came on about the northeast. We ended up in the northwest quite a bit, and it was they went there before I did, so I'm going to go there, and it won't be my fault, Chair. You won't be able to put me on it. But you were saying how you update existing, you update reports every 6 years, but then in the event of an extreme incident, you'll update it in between. Yeah, that's right. So, or the flood maps. Sorry. So, what way does that tie in with planning? You know, and is PPS 15 still fit for purpose in your view, or if there are existing applications, are they being judged against 1 in 100 year events that are now, you know, where we've seen even more severe events subsequently?
I understand your question. So, the flood risk management plans are in a 6-year cycle. If there was no flooding here, those plans would still be reviewed and would direct us what we need to do. Even in areas that had never flooded before, if we knew that they were at risk, we would be looking to invest to prevent that. And then our maps, as I outlined, are reviewed as part of that 6-year cycle. Now, our planning policy here is strong, and we are thankful for that.
Yeah.
And we advise the planning authorities, as we know, on flood risk. The maps that they use that would give them the indication that they should actually consult with us is our most recent flood maps. So they will be updated and put online. We don't hold them until they're 6 years old and then have a grand day of publication, for a better term. As we would update them, we would keep refreshing them, so the best information is out there as soon as possible.
And then, like I says, I would go into the northwest. I was wondering just maybe where Living with Water in Derry had gone. It was launched and then seemed to sink without a trace. That might be for someone else. I think it could be you guys dealing with it though. And in terms, you've mentioned Eglinton and Drumna and particular complexities in those areas. I was just wondering if maybe you could provide me just with a wee update on those.
Certainly. So Drumna is at the design phase, and it's hoped to have it complete early in 26. And then Eglinton, there's a review of options, and we're hoping to have it complete next spring. And we're happy to share those options and the outcome of any of our work at any stage, just to help the communities understand that we're still focused on trying to deliver a solution there. At one stage it looked like proposals in Drumna weren't even going to be viable, and that was back to my earlier point. You know, it would have been easy to have closed the book and said no viable scheme, and the time frame would have looked reasonable, but rather than do that, we've wanted to keep that open. Flooding occurred then in 2022, which then gave us some further information that we could work on, and a viable scheme seems to have re-emerged. So that's the situation.
And finally, welcome amendments to or improvements to the homeowner flood protection. But I just wonder if you could maybe furnish us in writing, I suppose, with details of those changes, the criteria.
Yes, certainly.
Super, thank you. Keith?
Okay, thanks gentlemen for coming along. I have a question. Well, it's several actually. Flood risk management plan. So give me an example of that. Pick Cookstown, and why not Cookstown? So what flood risk management plan covers Cookstown that would then answer some of the questions of this report? Are you with me? So give me an example of Cookstown. What's the flood risk management plan for it?
So the flood risk management plan, the very first cycle of them, had 20 areas of significant flood risk. And the next cycle then, the 21 to 27, has 12.
What do you define an area?
Usually a town or a city.
Okay, fair enough.
And you might look at it and say, well, my town or city's not on it. Does the department not care about the flood risk there? That's not the case. These are areas where the level of flooding is over, in the more recent plans, a threshold of damages that we would regard significant. So over £1 million of damages is regarded as significant, and that would cause then a a settlement to be considered as a significant flood risk area. In those plans, though, there's a whole range of what we call regional measures, which deals with our community resilience, our emergency response, the flood alleviation proposals that we're going to develop in other areas. So no area that we know that flood risk is left out. So, for example, Drumna and Eglinton weren't in the areas of significant flood risk in the flood risk management plan, and yet we're proposing to develop schemes there because we know there's a flood risk. Downpatrick was on the first list of flood risk management plans, the 2015 to 21 list. It's not on the 21 to 27 list, and someone could say, does that mean work in Downpatrick has stopped, or there's no proposals there? Not at all. We actually developed what we call a transitional list, so that no community was actually dropped off a list and work stopped. So we're as an organisation, no one wants to manage flood risk better than we do. So we don't want to have any community disadvantaged if at all possible. And we really want to have viable schemes going forward. So in the Cookstown area, if we were aware of an area of risk, that would go through the same proposals in terms of assessment, feasibility, business case to check if it's viable as any other settlement would.
In this report it says A10, based on the experience of 2023 flood review, how sandbags are stockpiled, etc., etc. Okay. And then on B2, it talks about investigate the feasibility of improving the surface drainage system. Okay. So I'm back to Cookstown, but it's still relevant to this report. We don't have sandbag storage in Cookstown. I requested, but it was turned down. There's a local place 2 miles away. But you've got minutes, if not seconds, to get your bags. We got it in Macrofeld, but not Cookstown. It's a very simple fix, but I'm concerned that this million figure is too high, because you could flood 10 houses and not necessarily cost £1 million. And then the second point about maintenance, there's no maintenance of gullies. Till a degree, maybe that's a wee bit blunt, till a degree. You see them go up the sides of the road, but see in residential areas, I can go to gullies now and they're full of muck. And you get a flash flood, you've 10 houses flooded in 10 minutes, the sun's shining, but you've less than £1 million, and it's not, it's not a big thing, but it's a big thing to have 10 houses. So there's a maintenance issue, and at the start, to be fair, James, you referred to a lot of maintenance that's been carried out, but maintenance should be carried out all the time, not after an event. So we could be writing a report like this in the future for somewhere else based on bad maintenance. Would you agree with that?
Not necessarily, no. So, number of points. You made a request there about sandbags. We're very open to that. So, if an elected rep or a community lead came forward and said we would like a sandbag store here, and there's any justification for it at all, we're very, proactive to try and do that. So, happy to hear about where that location was and see if we can revisit that. If it was indeed ourselves that turned it down, I'm not sure. Was it?
What goes it was Cookstown, is it? Because they refer to, and I'll get very local, that it's 1-2 miles away, but there's no time. A representative elected can be there within minutes. The time you get a key and go out 2 miles out the road and get DFI, no disrespect, it's too long.
I agree completely. I'm just querying, was it actually Rivers that turned it down, or yeah. Well, we'll revisit that point. Your second point there in around surface water and how we deal with that, and the maintenance of gullies. That goes back to our earlier point, I think, that Andrew was talking about. Where we are aware of issues, we'll be contacting our colleagues in NI Water or Roads, passing that information on to them. I know Roads colleagues appear before the committee themselves, and no doubt gully maintenance is part of that focus.
And final, staff and resources. So you talked about, you pull all the resources together to go to the southeast, and not take them away from over. What's your definition of staff and resources? Like, how many people are you talking about in that October? If you stand a team up or teams up, what numbers are we talking here?
If you talk about them, I'll let James or Gary come in with their own figure work, but when you're talking about the multi-agency response,
I'm talking DFI, as in Rivers.
There's over 300 people in Rivers, and the vast majority of those will be active whenever we've got an emergency response.
On the ground as such, yeah.
Well, not necessarily all on the ground, but they'll be coordinating on the ground, doing whatever we bring in staff from teams that ordinarily wouldn't respond to help. James and Gary might want to add some detail around that.
From a Rivers industrial perspective, you're looking at probably just shy of 200 people, but then you add in the Roads complement, and Roads will help us a lot, and they have a lot more people dispersed across. In relation to sandbags, we carry a stock departmentally of about 100,000 sandbags, so those are all accessed locally across the various Roads depots and Rivers depots, so it's not like we don't have them geographically dispersed across the country. We do, but I accept your point about the local resilience piece. Yeah, I accept that.
To point to the stretch earlier on, whenever we were down Patrick, it was a fairly focused event. Previous year that was Castledare. We had operations staff from Strabane in Downpatrick. We were able to bring as much in as everybody as we could to focus in that area on that southeast. So just harken back to that particular event, we were stretched. We had everybody that we could, about 106 out of 223 on the ground there. But had that event been more widespread, we would have been more stressed. Yeah. So just to reinforce that point.
Thanks, Chair.
I suppose the point that's really come out for me is the flood forecasting and how key that will be in helping, learn more, I suppose, and where flood incidences could happen. And just very briefly, in relation to this incident, the cost was estimated at 40 million in terms of South East. What the department's assessment of financial impact overall, and therefore the cost in relation to getting flood forecasting, hopefully, or I'm just assuming, if flood forecasting was in place, the likelihood of 40 million would be a lot less.
One would hope so, yes, and we've been trying to make that argument. The monetisation around this is a difficult piece, and it's a difficult piece for other jurisdictions as well. We've been across in fact-finding issues. We've looked north, south and east and west in this. We've been across to Scotland to look at their flood forecasting. And I have to provide a sort of realistic expectation around this. It does take a long time to develop a flood forecasting centre. But that said, the things that we're doing in the interim, particularly around the regional community resilience piece, will give communities really good information. So for instance, it's taken Scotland 6 to 10 years to develop a fully fledged flood forecasting centre, but that's not to say that over the course of the first 3 to 5 years you're getting real good benefits. It has been shown throughout Europe, particularly this year, that it has saved many lives. In terms of economic damage, yes, it could help, but it's very difficult to put a figure on that, and that's something that other nations as well as ourselves are struggling with, just that balance between economic benefit versus the injection of finance.
Yeah. I'll very briefly.
Just briefly, Jonathan, the PPS 15 flooding, I mean, I don't know what you said or not. I may have caught you wrong. It's fit for purpose at present day, yeah. In terms of policy, or does it need reviewed? Or
PPS 15 has fallen away as councils develop their own local development plans. They're developing their own plans, but it's largely mirroring the wording of PPS 15. So we have had a dedicated staff resource to engage with councils to give them the best information so that those policies are still strong in the local development plans, because that's
going to be a key element.
Exactly, that's a key piece.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Look, we do want to say that we do appreciate the fact of what staff do whenever these incidences do happen, because it is a crisis situation. We are all human, but we do want to put on record thanks to the staff in those elements, but obviously we just need to scope out how we can go forward and what we can do, and we do appreciate we do have a report there, and it will be great to see some of those recommendations having successful outcomes. So thank you for your time today, we really do appreciate it. Thank you.
I think just record that I had family members who worked in DFA Rivers at a point. Just
thank you. Okay, members, if you bear with me, we will rattle through the rest of the business. Thank you, Cal. Do members have anything else that they wish to add just at the end of that? Anything they want to follow up on, Keith?
I don't know, but it's probably a comment. It's how we get a communication between DFI Rivers and roads. There is gullies not being emptied. I know rivers, pick Cookstown, the rivers at the south end of the town, it's not a risk to flooding there, but other towns, the rivers in the middle, it's a bigger issue. But if the gullies aren't emptied, you could wipe out 10 houses and in 10 minutes all's clear again. There's a gully issue, maintenance, and that's a resource problem as well, no doubt.
Yeah, it did slightly concern me whenever I heard, we can't really tell another department we pass on elected representatives' concerns. That did slightly concern me in relation to that. But do you want to do anything in relation to that at this point, Keith?
It'd be good to know how that formally happens. If we can, we obviously issues with gullies and you report that as normal, but then 2 years later or 6 months later they're full again. But it's not our job to keep checking gullies.
No.
Do you want to check in terms of organisational structure?
Probably be good to get an overview of how often that's done and what way they risk assess a gully. A gully on the side of a road that just floods a part of a road. Yes, it's a road safety issue, but it's not going to flood a house. How do they risk assess gullies? You see A roads and motorways being done all the time, which is understandable, but residential areas is less. So how do they assess the risk or indeed organise frequency of areas? That'd be a good question.
Check in with the likes of
What's their structure of doing frequency of road gully clearing?
No, I think that's right.
Okay. Yes, Chair. I think just rising to my point too, and others mentioned it about community resilience and first point of contact. It'd be really good to know. Sometimes people in departments and councils can be like the Scarlet Pimpernel. When you need them most, you can't find them, and it is incredibly frustrating. And for some reason, residents come to us before they go to the state agencies. It'd be good to know when the thing hits, who do you phone? Who are the people on the front line coordinating the response, so that we as elected reps can make that right call, not spending an hour trying to get the right person. And if they had like that, you know, a list of numbers.
Because when a crisis hits,
the last thing you need is
everybody's going to be dealing with the situation, and that's what I have had in my lovely Fermanagh Lakelands. Whenever flooding hits, you know, it is,
It would just be good to have a list that we could use.
It will be back.
I know, because I did sort of have a wee laugh to myself. It does always seem to be at a weekend.
But it does fit into the community resilience, and that's the point I was making when you cut me off. I'm only joking. The one that we have actually set up our way was through council and rivers, and it's actually like you get the key there. It said it has to be lockbox, and you can just access it like that there. So whether it's a political rep or community activist, you can get it very quickly. So
and I suppose sorry to cut you off again, but I suppose that's the difficulty is some places are doing it better than others. Okay, happy enough with that? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, bear with me. We're going to rattle through the rest of the items here. So item 9 is SR 2024-176, the Plan and General Development Procedure Amendment Order, Northern Ireland 2024. From pages 315 to 323, you'll see documents in relation to the statutory rule. At page 324, you'll see the Examiner of Statutory Rules 24th report. The rule is subject to negative resolution, and 4 members this order amends the Planning Development Procedure Order Northern Ireland 2015 by introducing additional provisions which will provide councils with the statutory power to prepare and publish planning application validation checklists. These will set out additional supporting information or evidence required to accompany different types of planning application and will be above current minimum statutory requirements which remain unchanged. Plan applications will be assessed against these checklists before being considered as valid applications. The statutory rule also introduces an appeal mechanism in circumstances where an applicant disagrees with the council's decision not to validate an application by the Planning Appeals Commission. The order also includes 3 technical amendments to the 2015 order, align with the definition of outline plan and permission in the Planning Act Northern Ireland 2011, and amends Articles 13 and 15 to allow statutory consultees 30 days to consider planning applications that are accompanied by an environmental statement. The rule is due to come into operation on the 1st of April 2025. I remind members that the committee agreed it was content with the proposal for the statutory rule at its meeting on the 25th of September 2024. I inform members that the Examiner of Statutory Rules had no comments to make on the technical aspects of the statutory rule. So are members content with the statutory rule? Content? Okay, so the motion is that the Committee for Infrastructure has considered SR 2024-176, the Planning General Development Procedure Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2024, and has no objection to the rule. Thank you. Okay, item 10 is the SL1, the Coopers Mill Park Dundonald Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2024. At page 334, you'll see the SL1 proposal for the statutory rule. At page 337, a response from the Minister for Infrastructure regarding SL1s and regularisation. Advise members that the committee had requested further information on the issue of regularisation where retrospective action was being taken on this and some other proposals for statutory rules. A copy of the Minister's response is in the members' packs. The Minister explains that regularising is making official whatever existing arrangements are applicable in the area by way of legislation. Further information specific to this proposal and the next agenda item is included in the Minister's letter. So inform members that this proposed rule will abandon an area of 16.41 square metres of former road to the rear of the footway fronting number 1D Cooper's Mill Park, Dundonald. A developer who owns a bed and soil has requested for the area to be abandoned to facilitate a housing development. Following the abandonment, the area will revert to the owner of the bed and soil. The area of the former road is being abandoned retrospectively in order to regulise the situation on the ground, as the area has already been incorporated within the boundary of a new property. No objections were received in response to the consultation for the rule. So are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Content? Okay, thank you. Item 11 is SL1, the Drumna Walk Lurgan Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2024. At page 341 is the SL proposal for a statutory rule. The rule will be subject to negative resolution. The rule will abandon 809 square metres of superseded road at Drumna Walk Lurgan, comprising 2 areas of road consisting of 88 square metres commencing at a point 24 metres south-east of its junction with the Ansborough Road, and 721 square metres commencing at a point of 79 metres north-east of its junction with the Ansborough Road and extending for 121 metres in a north-easterly direction. The proposal has been requested by a solicitor on behalf of a developer to facilitate a housing development. The department and the developers own sections of the bed and soil to be abandoned with a portion of the land unregistered. Following the abandonment, the land in the department's ownership will be declared surplus and disposed of in accordance with the procedures for the sale of government-owned land. The developer has expressed an interest in acquiring the land. The abandonment is being carried out retrospectively in order to regularise the situation on the ground, as the areas of superseded road have been incorporated into a housing development that has already been constructed. No objections were received in response to the consultation for the proposal. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Content? Thank you. Item 12 is SL1, the Waring Street Lurgan Abandonment Order Northern Ireland 2024. At page 341 you'll see the SL1 proposal for a statutory rule. The rule will be subject to negative resolution. The rule will abandon an area of 300 square metres of former road at Waring Street Lurgan, comprising a car park from a point 17 metres southwest of its junction with Millennium Way and continuing for 29 metres in a northwesterly direction. The proposal has been requested by TRAN, Southern Lands team, in order to regularise the situation on the ground, as the road will be abandoned now forms part of Edward Street car park, for which the responsibility transferred to Armagh City, Banbridge and Craigavon Borough Council in April 2015. The area of land to be abandoned is unregistered and the department does not appear to hold title. Following the abandonment, responsibility for the land will revert to the council as part of its management of Edward Street car park. No objections were received in response to the consultation for the proposal. Are members content with the proposal for the statutory rule? Content? Yeah, thank you. 13 is subordinate legislation. SR is not subject to assembly procedure. There are 5 statutory rules that are not subject to assembly proceedings and are not required to be laid. These are pages 449 of the meeting pack and are SR 2024-179, the Parking Places Disabled Persons Vehicles Amendment Number 4, Order Northern Ireland 2024, the SR 2024-180, the Parking Waiting Restrictions Belfast Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2024, SR 2024-181, the Parking Places Disabled Persons Vehicles Amendment Number 5, Order Northern Ireland 2024, the SR 2024-182, the Parking and Waiting Restrictions Derry Londonderry Order Northern Ireland 2024 and SR 2024-183, the parking places on roads, electric vehicles Order Northern Ireland 2024. So I'm asking members if they are content to note the statutory rules. Thank you. Okay, so item 14 is the forward work programme at page 383. You'll see the draft work programme. You'll see there there's Belfast Harbour Commission at page 386. There's correspondence from them with an invitation to visit and request a brief. So I'm just asking members if they wish to consider a visit and briefing at appropriate time in the forward work programme. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. With quite a heavy agenda as it comes up till December, with quite a number of things, so we'll just note it for a time that's appropriate. All right. There's also the active travel delivery plan at page 3 of your table packed with an invitation and agenda for the launch event for the consultation on the active travel delivery plan. So I'm just reminding members that was actually, we'd also agreed to go to visit NI water treatment plants. So that is also scheduled for the 13th of November. So I'm asking members just if you're content to note the correspondence and to consider the matter further when the outcome of the consultation and proposed way forward on the active travel is available, if you're content with that.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Anything else that anybody wants to add just to that? Oh, sorry.
AOB just.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah, Keith?
Just on these possible visits, see the 13th, what's confirmed then? Is it wastewater and processed water, or what's the plan there?
So, has it been totally confirmed?
It has, Chair, yes, it's Moyola. So it's treatment water. And the meeting then will be held on site. So the plan is then to take evidence from Northern Ireland Water in response to basically what you've heard today about the capacity issues.
So it's purely for treated water we're visiting, not a wastewater, just the treated water?
Yes,
one
just
site?
The one site at this stage,
for
yes.
treated water.
If you want to go, we can arrange
Could we, considering we're there and the other one's literally, could we squeeze in the two?
Sure, I would need to check. I can check with them to see where they could do it, but that the time then taken for that actually might preclude a meeting on the day, unless you just want to just take a visit on the day and arrange for evidence at a different time. It's entirely up to the committee.
I just have to say I have education on the same day, so.
2
yeah.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock, yeah, so just bear in mind.
Moyola's Castle Dawson.
And we do.
Yeah.
We do have scheduled in to actually speak to NI Water about the capacity issues as well, to bear that in mind too.
We focus on the processed water and then a briefing on the same day, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, just on that, if that's possible, is it possible then to get information prior to that? So if we're going to visit that site, I've wrote a few points down: process flow maps, capacity, volume, filtration detail, regime and servicing, a whole picture. So whenever we're walking around, we're not just looking at equipment because it loses you. It'd be good to get an understanding of a flow maps. At least you can look at it just to.
What's the process?
Correct.
How does this
and what the
fit
filter
in?
regime, because the water quality and market quality has now improved since the conversation happened and a bit of media. Interestingly, but the green algae has not went away.
No.
So it's a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just, I'm only saying a process map would help. It helped me, but it would help to get an understanding better, because you just can't get lost in pipes.
Yeah. Well, I hope none of us get lost in pipes
Not in
when
them,
we're
but
there.
out there.
Be a bit like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Have you got a note of all that?
I think so. Process flow maps, capacity, volume, filtering regime.
Filtration details. So what the
details.
filtration systems is in there, and then the regime and servicing.
And we'll look forward to reading that.
And the maintenance regime prior to and more lately, something has changed.
Yeah. Okay. Happy enough?
Yeah, thank you. It's just to get it. I think it'd be better for everybody if you had that.
Yeah, and I think also just the fact we have NI Water scheduled in for a briefing too, hopefully we can tease out some of those other issues too within that.
If I may, and I don't want to prolong the thing, it'd be good to get that same information if we're talking broadly about water treatment. to get an understanding of what way their water treatment systems work and what processes they use, because they're different across different sectors. Just to get a wee flow diagram for both sectors, one on the day and one that following up meeting.
Yeah, that's the engineer in you, Keith.
Deny.
Okay, anything else that members want to raise on that? Okay. Okay, item 15 is any other business. I'm seeking agreement that, if required, the meeting pack for the 6th of November can be issued on Monday, the 4th of November, outside of the normal service standards. Obviously, it is next week is recess, so and there will be some staff on annual leave. So you're okay with that? Yeah. Okay, Stephen, you'd any other business?
Thanks, Chair. It was just last week the UK government announced a task force on car insurance, and I think it would be in the interest potentially of this committee to maybe write to the Transport Secretary, to ensure that Northern Ireland is very much included centrally within that task force. Obviously, we're all familiar with the challenges and the major issue and costs that it is for car drivers, particularly younger and older drivers. Particularly impacted, and costs can sometimes get out of control, where the insurance is maybe double or triple the cost and value of the car. And I think I would just propose that we would write to Louise Haig MP, Transport Secretary, on that. Yeah. And the other point, just to build onto that as well, potentially, is the Motorcycle Action Group, who were with us a number of months ago. They have flagged up on the back of the announcement that motorcyclists aren't included, certainly in the terminology, in that it's a car insurance task force. So perhaps we could, just echo that point, that motorcycle thefts is an issue which is impacting on costs of insurance for motorcycles as well. Obviously, cars are the majority of road users, but motorcyclists are an important group as well. So I would like to make that proposal if I can, please, Chair.
I think everybody content with that? I think that's a fair enough point, and we can point to the fact that we have debated about this in the Assembly chamber as well. So that sounds good. Thank you. Any other items? Members are content. Okay, so the date, time and location of the next meeting. The next meeting will take place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 6th of November, in room 29, Parliament Buildings. Thank you, members. And now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room